Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. A dry corpse was discovered in an abandoned basement of an office building in Beijing in 2006. The entire thin, withered skin clung tightly to the skeleton. The clothing had a few holes, and thanks to the bra still attached to the corpse, it could be identified as a woman. The corpse was hidden in a ventilation shaft, described as resembling a mummy in American horror movies, making anyone who sees it for the first time feel chilled. The victim's identity was revealed, leaving many people astonished. She was a wealthy young lady from Beijing, who had been missing since October 1999. What was even more shocking was that the perpetrators were caught for this horrifying crime, but when they went to court, they were acquitted. Let's unravel the mysterious mummy case, hidden for 7 years in the most mysterious ventilation shaft in China, with many thrilling details still behind. The backdrop of this real-life case occurred in Beijing, China. In July, the management of the Beihang building in Beijing decided to repurpose a portion of the long-abandoned second basement level into a parking lot. The warehouse manager, Mr. Wang, was entrusted with the responsibility of inspecting and cleaning this area in preparation for the renovation process. Around 9 a.m. on July 7th, Mr. Wang, carrying a flashlight and other cleaning tools, eagerly descended into the long-sealed basement. The surrounding space was cold and dark, with only the flickering flashlight light reflecting off the old walls. As he delved deeper into the basement, he suddenly felt a chill down his spine, as if an invisible eye was watching him from the darkness behind. On a natural instinct, Mr. Wang startledly turned around, shining the flashlight directly at the large ventilation fan. Through the dim light, he recognized the vague silhouette of a human-like strange object. Despite his fear, curiosity led Mr. Wang to slowly approach to inspect it. When the flashlight illuminated the strange object lying on the floor, Mr. Wang froze, horrified to realize it was a long-dried mummified corpse. Overcome by fear, Mr. Wang collapsed to the ground, his hands trembling, and he cried out in panic. After regaining his composure, he stammered as he took out his phone and called the police. In less than half an hour, the police had arrived at the scene. Mr. Wang, trembling, described the horrifying condition of the corpse to the police. "It looks just like a mummified body from a horror movie. Truly frightening." He recounted that the entire thin layer of skin was tightly adhered to the skeleton. The clothes were torn, with several holes and gaps, and notably, he found a white bra on the corpse, helping to identify that it was a female body. Additionally, above the victim's chest, there was a long and narrow wound, surrounded by dark brown blood clots. On the ground, there were also traces of many dried blood stains. Around 3 p.m., the corpse was taken away by an ambulance, and the police stated they would conduct a forensic examination to determine the cause and time of death. The information about a female mummified corpse found under a ventilation duct in an abandoned basement shocked the city of Beijing. According to the forensic examination results, the victim was a young woman, approximately between 18 and 22 years old. On her body, there were signs of a severe blunt force impact to the head and face, causing her face to be heavily distorted to the point of being unrecognizable. During the examination, the forensic doctor also noted signs indicating that she may have been sexually assaulted before her death. However, due to the passage of time, DNA testing became difficult, almost impossible to perform. The victim showed signs of paying attention to her appearance. She had painted nails and toenails, and was dressed in what was considered relatively high-end attire. Next to the corpse, the police found a small bag from a luxury brand, containing some cosmetics but no wallet or cash. It is noteworthy that the bag contained a newspaper titled Beijing Evening News, dated October 6, 1999. This detail became an important clue for the police investigation. Based on information from the newspaper, the police hypothesized that the victim may have died approximately 7 years earlier, that is, before or shortly after the building was completed in 1999. The victim's body was concealed in a ventilation duct in the building's basement, where the strong fan winds had dried the corpse. The location of this ventilation duct was in a very secluded area, normally inaccessible or unclimbable for inspections, preventing the discovery of the victim's body. This time, during a comprehensive maintenance of the building's pipeline system, workers accidentally uncovered the horrifying truth that had been hidden in the darkness for many years. By reviewing missing person cases from 1999, the police found a mysterious case where the victim's family had yet to locate her whereabouts. Rewinding to 1999, the Beijing building was then known as the Lianfa Building, a high-rise office building located opposite the northwest Beijing railway station. On the evening of October 7, 1999, a 19-year-old young woman parked her car in the underground garage of the northwest Beijing railway station and prepared to go to the Lianfa building, the place where she worked. When the car was securely parked in the basement lot, the young woman got out and began walking towards the staircase leading to the first floor of the Lianfa building, which was only about 50 to 60 meters away. However, something strange happened. On the short path from the garage to the company, Guiaoya seemingly disappeared mysteriously, leaving no trace behind. The young woman's name was Guiaoya. She came from a wealthy family, had a beautiful appearance, and dressed very fashionably. Guiaoya's parents stated that on October 7, 1999, while having dinner with the family, Guiaoya received a call from the company urging her to come to the support office. Shortly after, Guiaoya left home, intending to return immediately after completing her work. That entire night, the family did not receive any calls or news from her. Her phone was turned off, leading her parents to believe that she might be working overtime overnight at the company. The next morning, still unable to contact Guiaoya, the family began to worry and investigate. They discovered that the previous night, Guiaoya did not go to the office as planned and immediately reported to the police. Upon checking the basement parking lot, the police found that Guiaoya's car was still in the B1 level, with no signs of disturbance or theft. From the sole surveillance camera at the parking lot entrance, they saw the young woman drive in at around 9 p.m. on October 7th, after which she vanished without a trace. Investigators searched every floor of the Lianfa building, checking every nook and cranny, but found no unusual signs. In 1999, the parking lot did not have an elevator, forcing users to walk up to the first floor. The distance from where Guiaoya parked to the staircase was too short, seemingly providing no reason for her to disappear without a trace. Some hypotheses about abduction have been proposed, especially since her family belongs to the wealthy class. However, strangely, no ransom calls were made. As time passed, the disappearance of Guiaoya gradually fell into oblivion. But 7 years later, a horrific discovery stunned everyone. The body of a girl was found in the building's ventilation system. Based on the dress and handbag the girl was wearing, Guiaoya's parents immediately recognized the possibility that this was their daughter. DNA analysis confirmed that the mummified body was indeed the young girl, Guiaoya, who went missing mysteriously in 1999. Many signs at the scene indicate that Guiaoya did not disappear naturally, but became a victim of a murder case. She was killed and her body hidden in the ventilation ducts for 7 years until it was found in a mummified state, making the case even more mysterious and horrifying. After identifying the body, the police proceeded to investigate the case from two clear aspects. First, Guiaoya was a beautiful girl from a wealthy family with a fashionable style, often driving her own car to work. She met the criteria of a white wealthy beauty in that era, attracting the attention of many young men. However, Guiaoya had few friends and did not hold grudges against anyone. Her sudden death led many to consider the possibility that this was a random murder, perhaps by a stranger, who targeted her upon her accidental appearance before the murderer. Second, the location where the body was disposed of was too discreet and visited by few people when Guiaoya held it for 7 years without anyone noticing. This indicates that the murderer was very familiar with the structure of the building, knowing that the place was seldom passed by, especially the basement. The perpetrator must have had in-depth knowledge of the basement of the Beijing building to be confident that the body would not be easily discovered. So who could meet the two conditions? The answer seems to lie in 1999, when the Beijing building was still under construction. Some construction workers lived temporarily on the building's second basement floor, and they had full opportunities to know this area well. With that position and access, the group of construction workers became the primary suspects. Guiaoya's parents revealed that 7 years ago, the police had not thoroughly inspected the warehouse on B2 basement. This floor was once locked due to illegal renovation activities, and guards would only check once a month to prevent risks of electrical and water leaks. Only the building's owner and security staff responsible for patrolling the basement had the key to access this area. In 1999, Guiaoya's family was once allowed by a guard named Wu over 60 years old, to open the door to check the basement, but they never considered examining the duct system. No one expected that Guiaoya had actually been lying in the building's ventilation shaft for 7 years without anyone noticing. During the interrogation process, the police identified the first suspect as Guiaoya's superior, Zhang Hua. A female colleague revealed that it was Zhang Hua who requested her to call Guiaoya to come to the company for overtime work in the evening. After giving the instructions, he quickly went down to the parking lot to wait for Guiaoya. Zhang Hua left the office for about 30 minutes, and upon returning, he said he did not see any trace of her. Upon learning about Guiaoya's disappearance, Zhang Hua immediately warned the two female not to disclose anything about his 30-minute absence from the office, and not to talk nonsense. The two female colleagues, fearing repercussions, chose to conceal the information. During the investigation, the police further discovered that Zhang Hua had been pursuing Guiaoya, even though he was twice her age and already had a family. However, Xiaoya had rejected his advances. Based on these testimonies, Zhang Hua quickly became the main suspect in the case. However, when the police examined the detailed timeline, they found many inconsistencies. According to the investigation data, Guiaoya received the overtime call at around 7 p.m. and left her home after 9 p.m. The surveillance camera recorded her driving into the parking garage at approximately 9:40 p.m. In the meantime, Zhang Hua left the office at 9:10 p.m. and returned at 9:40 p.m., meaning the overlapping time between the two was only a few minutes. Even if Zhang Hua had met Guiaoya, it would have been difficult for him to carry out the sexual assault and then murder her, drag the body down to the B2 basement, and hide it in the ventilation shaft within 3 to 4 minutes. According to the police's estimate, completing all these actions would take at least 20 to 30 minutes. Furthermore, the two female employees stated that when Zhang Hua returned to the office, he showed no unusual behavior, maintained a calm demeanor, was neatly dressed as usual, and showed no signs of stress or worry. After eliminating Zhang Hua from suspicion, the police continued to check those who might have the keys to the B2 basement storage to find new leads in the case. In addition to the building owner and Mr. Wu, there was another person who held the key to the B2 floor, namely the Liu family contractor. Mr. Liu was responsible for supervising the construction on the B2 floor, but after completing his work, he did not return the key. Nevertheless, many witnesses confirmed that on the night of the incident, Mr. Liu was playing mahjong with the building owner and had no time to commit the crime. Meanwhile, Mr. Wu suffered a stroke in 1998, leaving him with hemiplegia, making mobility difficult and one of his arms unable to move flexibly. However, Mr. Wu provided the police with an important clue related to the night of the murder. He stated that on that night, while patrolling the parking lot, he happened to notice 3 workers pacing around, smoking and appearing unusually agitated. Among these workers was Zhao Jiang, a 20-year-old man working in Mr. Liu's construction crew. To ensure the progress of the project, the contractor hired workers to work during the day and let them rest at nearby campsites at night. When Mr. Wu inquired, Zhao Jiang said that they had been drinking and watching pornographic films, couldn't sleep, and were planning to visit a prostitute to relieve themselves. This group certainly did not behave decently on the night of October 6, 1999, Mr. Wu affirmed. 98, however, the day Mr. Wu mentioned does not coincide with the day Guiaoya went missing and was murdered. The police speculated that, after 7 years, due to his old age, Mr. Wu might have confused the dates, and the discrepancy of just 1 day was not significant. When the police asked why he did not report this clue in 1999, Mr. Wu stammered an explanation that he feared retaliation. Based on Mr. Wu's testimony, the police quickly arrested Zhao Jiang for interrogation. Notably, after so many years, Zhao Jiang was still working under the management of Mr. Liu's contractor. At the police station, Zhao Jiang initially denied all charges, trying to argue that he was completely innocent. However, under intense pressure from the investigators, he eventually bowed his head and admitted to forcibly abducting and murdering the young girl, Guiaoya. In his testimony, Zhao Jiang also revealed 2 accomplices who participated in the crime, Yang Guanghua and Wang Fuming. According to Zhao Jiang's testimony, on the night of the incident, after meeting Mr. Wu, the 3 workers intended to leave the area to seek out a prostitute. However, at that moment, Guiaoya, a young, beautiful woman dressed fashionably, was stepping out of her car. Guiaoya's striking appearance caught the attention of the 3 men, including Zhao Jiang, who then made obscene and vulgar remarks. Angered, Guiaoya scolded them, and then turned quickly towards the staircase to distance herself from their lecherous gazes. However, the three men did not abandon their intentions and pursued her, brutally beating her despite her desperate cries for help. With no one there to help, Guiaoya was dragged by them down to the B2 basement into a dark and cold warehouse. In basement B2, all three workers did not hesitate to take turns repeatedly forcing Guiaoya multiple times, leaving her with no strength to resist. The weak and desperate girl gradually became exhausted under the brutal torture of these bestial men. After satisfying their animalistic desires and fearing that Guiaoya would report to the police, the three decided not to let the victim survive. The three men then proceeded to murder Guiaoya and hide her body in the ventilation duct, followed by thoroughly cleaning the crime scene to eliminate all traces. The three criminals believed that, due to the secluded and dark location of this basement, very few people would come by, and perhaps no one would discover her corpse. They thought that even if someone did find it, there would be enough time for the three to escape. Basing on Zhao Deqiang's detailed testimony, the police quickly tracked down and arrested the remaining two suspects in this case, Yang Guanghua and Wang Fuming. At the police station, under interrogation, both also confessed to the heinous crimes they had committed in October 1999. Normally, the next step would be the appropriate legal punishment for them. However, subsequent developments occurred unexpectedly, leaving many people puzzled and concerned about the outcome of this horrific case. In 2007, the Beijing Municipal People's Procuratorate officially filed a prosecution petition to Beijing Intermediate People's Court No. 1, accusing the three involved individuals of criminal responsibility for the forcible assault and murder of Guiaoya. However, when the case was brought to court, investigators and judges discovered many irregularities. Notably, this case lacked physical evidence and was entirely based on the confessions of the three suspects. If the suspects' confessions were consistent, especially with details only the perpetrator would know, this could serve as a basis for conviction. However, in this case, the testimonies of the three suspects were clearly contradictory on key details. Zhao Deqiang and Wang Fuming provided different accounts regarding the location where the body was hidden through the ventilation duct. In contrast, Yang Guanghua did not even know where the body was hidden and did not mention the detail about the ventilation duct at all. The descriptions of the method of murder also showed significant differences. Wang Fuming claimed that he had stabbed Guiaoya multiple times in the chest and abdomen with a knife. In contrast, Yang Guanghua asserted that he had only stabbed the victim directly in the heart. However, the crucial point is that none of the three mentioned that the victim was beaten with a blunt object. After examination, Guiaoya's body showed no stab wounds or signs of injury caused by a sharp object. Furthermore, the suspects were inconsistent in describing how they brought Guiaoya down to the warehouse, the order of coercion, and the details of unlocking the door on the B2 basement level, an important factor that all three could not explain. In 2007, one of the three suspects, Wang Fuming, died of a cerebral infarction, leading to his trial. As for Yang Guanghua, he appeared to speak incoherently, with vacant eyes, and was later diagnosed with intellectual disability. Zhao Deqiang also showed signs of a mental disorder. During the trial, both Yang Guanghua and Zhao Deqiang retracted their confessions, asserting that they had been coerced and forced to fabricate stories about the murder of Guiaoya. Zhao Deqiang even strongly stated in court, "I did not coerce or kill anyone. Everything I previously confessed is not true." After the trial process, Beijing Intermediate People's Court No. 1 concluded that the evidence was not sufficient to convict. Ultimately, both defendants were acquitted in the first instance trial due to insufficient evidence for conviction. After the first instance judgment was pronounced, the prosecution immediately filed an appeal, arguing that the evidence could fully prove the criminal acts of Zhao Deqiang and Yang Guanghua. At the appellate trial, the prosecution presented a series of evidence to reinforce the argument for convicting the two defendants. However, Yang Guanghua unexpectedly changed his testimony and denied the charges of coercion and killing Guiaoya as previously alleged. After review, the Beijing High People's Court issued a statement that there are still many unclear points in the case. Guiaoya's disappearance on the night of October 7, 1999, was only discovered when her body was found in the second basement level of Beijing building in July 2006, 7 years after her disappearance. However, The chain of evidence and confessions from Zhao Deqiang, Yang Guanghua, and Wang Fuming still could not form a complete body of evidence, lacking a solid foundation to establish the charges. The prosecution accused these three individuals of coercion and murdering Guiaoya, but the evidence was not clear enough, and the case still has many unresolved points. Therefore, according to the provisions of Article 189, Clause 1 of the Criminal Procedure Law of the People's Republic of China, the judgment has rejected the prosecution's appeal and upheld the original verdict. In relation to the case, the investigative agency conducted an examination of the victim's underwear based on the testimonies of the three defendants to search for related DNA evidence, but no positive results were obtained. When interrogating the employees of the Beijing building, it was confirmed that the two entrances to the second basement had been locked since 1999, and only technical staff had the keys. This raises a major question. How could the three workers have brought Guiaoya into this sealed basement to commit the crime? The police and prosecutors argue that the suspect's memories may have been distorted due to the long time elapsed since the incident, and the crime scene has been significantly renovated over the past 2 years. However, the fact that the defendants initially admitted and then denied the charges makes their testimonies even more unreliable. The case was requested to be reinvestigated, but too much time had passed and physical traces such as blood, semen, fingerprints or footprints of the suspects had almost entirely disappeared after 7 years. At that time, the police only considered the case as a regular disappearance, leading to a hasty investigation and missing the opportunity to find the perpetrator. Due to insufficient evidence and many contradictions in the testimonies of the three suspects, they were acquitted according to the law. From a legal perspective, determining a person's guilt must be based on conclusive evidence. Even though the public and authorities believe these three individuals are the perpetrators, without solid evidence, the law cannot arbitrarily impose penalties. This is a special case where witnesses, police, prosecutors, and the court all lean towards the possibility of prosecution, but lacked convincing evidence. 25 years have passed, and to this day, Beijing police continue to search for clues in the Guiaoya case, but there has been no significant progress. Case 2. Idaho Falls, Idaho, USA is a quiet and peaceful city. The residents here are mostly Mormon, neighbors all know each other by name, and doors are rarely locked. However, a horrifying incident occurred, shaking this wonderfully peaceful city to its core. On the afternoon of June 13th, Julia and Tawny, two young women working at a cosmetics store downtown, went to knock on the door of their colleague Angie's house. Angie Dodge hadn't shown up for her shift, and after getting no response over the phone, the two hurried to her house to check on her. Angie's apartment was on the upper floor of an old building with faded wooden panels, located on a quiet street in the northern part of the city. Since no one answered, the two co-workers let themselves in, calling out Angie's name, but there was no reply. They walked down the hallway, checked the living room, but found nothing unusual, so they decided to look in the bedroom. When the door opened, the two young women screamed in horror and rushed outside to call the police after seeing Angie's body in the bedroom. Soon, Idaho Falls City Police arrived at the scene. In the bedroom, Angie lay on the floor, with her head resting against the wall, next to a mattress covered with blood-stained sheets. There was a large wound on the victim's throat, and her body bore 14 other injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, but evidence indicated a struggle had taken place. Police concluded that Angie had been murdered sometime between 12:45 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. on June 13th. They collected the bedsheet and her clothes for examination, also obtaining a DNA sample from the killer. It was an intact semen sample, indicating that the victim had been sexually assaulted. When informed by the police, Carol Dodge nearly collapsed upon hearing the news that her daughter had been brutally murdered. "I just stared at that house and tried to imagine how terrified she must have been," Carol said through tears. Carol vividly remembers the moment when her daughter pulled up in front of her modest house and gave her a goodbye kiss. She shared that the two often argued, but would quickly make up afterward. Her daughter had just turned 18 and longed for the freedom to live her life without being controlled. Angie was the youngest of Carol's 4 children, and the only daughter, inheriting many of her mother's striking features from piercing eyes to blonde hair. Neighbors confirmed that mother and daughter shared many similarities, such as being tough and straightforward. Angie had recently broken up with her boyfriend, and just a few weeks prior, moved into her first apartment. Carol never imagined that her daughter's goodbye kiss would become their final moment together. Now I think it was a moment granted by God, and I'm so grateful that we had that moment, the mother said through tears. The murder of Angie Dodge quickly spread throughout the city, leaving more questions than answers. Who could have done this, and why would they target Angie? In a small city like Idaho Falls, where crime is low and everyone knows each other, the murder of a teenage girl was unprecedented. The Idaho Falls Police Department pursued the theory that multiple people were involved in the murder of Angie Dodge. The only evidence they had was the perpetrator's DNA left at the crime scene. Therefore, they collected DNA samples from dozens of men, including members of the River Rats, a group of young men who had dropped out of school and spent their days joking around and drinking by the Snake River. However, the police investigation found no matches. The Idaho Falls Police Department, unaccustomed to investigating a complex murder case, seemed overwhelmed by the situation. 6 months after the murder, there were still no clear leads, and frustration began to grow. Carol Dodge became anxious and criticized the police department, saying they were not competent enough to solve the case. Then she had an idea. The strong-willed woman distributed thousands of flyers, offering a $5,000 reward for any information related to the case. When this effort yielded no results, she began patrolling the streets late at night, asking anyone for information about her daughter's murder. Carol often barged into the local police station unannounced, demanding to know what the police were doing to find the perpetrator. The building's back door was nicknamed the Carol Door by officers due to her frequent appearances. However, the police officers remained indifferent, sitting cross-legged and merely looking at the grieving mother with a smile. They just laughed at me. They called me a crazy, grieving mother, Carol said through tears. The victim's family was deeply disappointed and wanted answers, while the media continuously criticized the police department for their delays. It wasn't until January 1997, 7 months after the murder, that the police arrested a suspicious young man. In Nevada, a young man named Benjamin Hobbs was arrested for threatening and assaulting a woman with a knife. Investigators found the incident similar to Angie's case, especially since Hobbs was from Idaho Falls and knew Angie. Thus, Hobbs became the prime suspect. The police tried to build a case around Hobbs, even though he repeatedly denied any involvement in Angie's murder. While investigating Hobbs, the police also took notice of his friends, including Christopher Tapp. Tapp was also Angie's friend and a member of the River Rats. Tapp consistently stated that he knew nothing about Angie's murder or Hobbs' crime in Nevada. Despite Tapp's continuous denials, the police focused on him, convinced that he was the prime suspect in Angie's case. Over 3 weeks, he was interrogated 9 times and subjected to 7 polygraph tests. After numerous interrogations, Tapp unexpectedly admitted that he had been present the night Angie was murdered. According to Tapp's confession, he and Hobbs were involved in the murder and attacked the victim. However, DNA tests of both Tapp and Hobbs came back negative, indicating that neither was the perpetrator. Despite the DNA mismatch, with Tapp's confession in hand, detectives hypothesized that there might have been a third man involved. At the same time, the police found a female witness who claimed to have heard Tapp and Hobbs talking about the murder at a party. The witness suggested that Tapp and Hobbs killed Angie over a money dispute. Following the witness's accusation, Tapp then mentioned a man named Jeremy Sargis as being present the night of the murder. However, Sargis' DNA test also came back negative. Detectives concluded that Tapp was not telling the truth, believing that he committed the crime alone but tried to pin it on Hobbs and Sargis. After many hours of interrogation, Tapp finally confessed to committing the crime by himself, claiming he had implicated Hobbs and Sargis to try to escape blame. Thus, Tapp was labeled as Angie's killer despite the absence of physical evidence linking him to the crime, solely based on his confession. The trial began in May 1998, with Tapp appearing in court in a baggy navy blue suit and matching tie. After the judge finished reading the indictment, Tapp unexpectedly retracted his confession and claimed he was innocent. He asserted that his confession had been coerced by the police and, moreover, DNA testing had proven he was not the killer. However, no one in the courtroom believed Tapp's words, as they all assumed he was the culprit. In particular, the prosecution had a witness, a woman who testified that Tapp was the murderer. When Carol saw the killer, she angrily cursed him as a bastard for brutally killing her daughter. To this grieving mother, Tapp was the embodiment of evil, the one who had taken her daughter's life. It took the jury over 13 hours to reach a guilty verdict, sentencing Tapp to 40 years in prison. Although the perpetrator was convicted, Carol still felt dissatisfied, believing that the death penalty would have been more fitting for Tapp's crime. Moreover, since the DNA found on her daughter did not match either Tapp or Hobbs, Carol believed there was at least one more perpetrator still at large, based on an investigator's statement. Because of this, Carol harbored resentment toward Tapp for not revealing his accomplice. Before leaving the courtroom, Carol wrote a letter to Tapp, but he never responded. "Chris, I don't understand why you didn't reveal the other person's name. I'm really angry now," Carol wrote. Nearly 2 years after Angie Dodge's murder, Tapp was imprisoned, and the case went cold. But Carol remained determined to find the person who left the DNA at the crime scene to get justice for her daughter. Determined to find the remaining killer, Carol visited the police station daily, drove miles through rundown neighborhoods to distribute flyers, and combed through police reports. She even watched members of the River Rats as they gathered by the river, suspecting they might be connected to the case. In 2009, more than a decade after Angie's murder, the killer's DNA was entered into the National Criminal Database, but there were still no matches. A few years later, Carol was given a personal computer, and she immediately used it to search for ways to identify the killer. After finding a company capable of determining the race of the unknown DNA sample, Carol convinced the police to send the sample for testing. The results showed that the perpetrator was 85% white, giving Carol more clues to work with. At that time, DNA technology had made significant advancements. With the help of an organization, Carol pushed the Idaho Falls Police Department to try something called familial DNA testing. This method involved searching the Idaho offender database to see if anyone was related to Angie's killer. After 2 years of legal battles, the state denied access to the criminal database for this type of testing. As a result, Hampikian suggested uploading the crime scene sample to public databases like Ancestry.com, and the police agreed to this plan thanks to Carol's persistent efforts. The results indicated a notable suspect, a filmmaker from New Orleans. He had visited Idaho Falls in 1996, and even made a short film about the murder of a young woman. However, DNA testing once again came back negative, and the police had to start over from scratch. Carol continued her efforts to find clues, but the case remained at a standstill until one day in 2012. While reading a police report, she discovered that some pubic hairs found at the scene might belong to the victim. Carol wanted to know whether those hairs belonged to her daughter or the killer. She immediately contacted DNA expert Dr. Greg Hampikian, founder and director of the Idaho Innocence Project, which works on wrongful conviction cases. Coincidentally, the organization had just agreed to take on Tapp's case. It turned out that during his time in prison, Tapp had repeatedly appealed, but to no avail. "I didn't kill anyone or hurt anybody. Please review my case. I really need someone to help me get free," Tapp wrote in a plea letter. When Carol learned that Tapp had sought help from the Idaho Innocence Project, she was displeased. She believed it was just another excuse from a murderer. Seeing the letter from the supposed killer asking for the organization's help made Carol even angrier. The only thing she wanted to know was whether there was another perpetrator involved in her daughter's case, so she didn't care who Tapp sought help from. DNA testing revealed that the pubic hair matched the same man who had left DNA on Angie's body. Hampikian concluded that the DNA and evidence at the scene indicated that there was only one killer, not 3, as detectives had claimed. With this finding, the Idaho Innocence Project also concluded that Tapp was not the perpetrator and that his confession to the police was false. Carol was shocked when she received the results from Dr. Hampikian. She was confused and not ready to accept that Tapp might be innocent. She still thought the prosecutors might be right, that Tapp was the culprit along with someone else, but he was too scared to reveal that person. A local newspaper obtained the interrogation tapes through the Freedom of Information Act and shared them with Carol. There were over 25 hours of footage, all on VHS tapes with poor audio quality and no subtitles. Nevertheless, she spent several days watching and re-watching all the interrogation tapes conducted by Detective Jared Fuhrman with Tapp. After carefully reviewing the tapes, Carol became so furious that she wanted to smash the TV. The recordings made her doubt whether Tapp was really the one who killed her daughter. Therefore, she contacted Steve Dreisen, a world-renowned expert on false confessions. Steve called Tapp's interrogation the worst example of police interference he had ever seen. Although Tapp confessed to killing Angie, during the recorded interrogation, he got details wrong about the victim's apartment, its layout, and many other aspects. Moreover, with each interrogation, Tapp's story changed. Initially, he claimed that neither he nor Hobbs was involved, then said Hobbs had asked him to lie for an alibi, and finally confessed to being at the scene when Hobbs committed the crime. When the police realized that the unknown DNA did not match either Tapp or Hobbs, they did not release them. Instead, they pressured Tapp to name an accomplice in exchange for a lighter sentence. Stephen believed that the police used psychological tactics to make Tapp think he was repressing horrific memories of the crime. To turn Tapp into the killer, the police showed him crime scene photos or asked leading questions. If Tapp didn't cooperate, they threatened him with the death penalty, forcing him to confess. The released interrogation videos showed Tapp exhausted, constantly holding his face in his hands, crying uncontrollably, and almost unable to speak. Michael Heavey, a retired judge and founder of Judges for Justice, a group that works to overturn suspected wrongful convictions, also believed Tapp was innocent. After reviewing the interrogation tapes, he pointed out to Carol the irregularities, such as how Tapp knew nothing about the crime scene. Heavey noted suspicious signs during the police interrogation and believed that Tapp had been deceived. He even suggested that Tapp might have been brainwashed and manipulated. After hearing the opinions of the experts, Carol became furious and decided to call Tapp in prison. "Hey, you bastard, you were either at the scene or you weren't. Tell the truth. If you were there, God, you're going to die if you don't tell me the name of the person you were with and committed the crime. And if you weren't there, you better scream that you weren't there." Tapp then replied that he was not the perpetrator and was not present at the scene. Hearing Tapp's answer, Carol broke down, realizing that she had been deceived by the police. Tapp was not the killer. How could they convince Tapp to confess and imprison him for a crime he didn't commit? Carol cried out in despair. At that moment, she realized that she had wrongly blamed Tapp and became determined to clear his name and find the real killer. However, her words were dismissed as crazy and nonsensical by her family, who thought she had lost her mind from the trauma of losing her daughter. Moreover, both the media and the police considered Carol's findings unreliable. In 2012, Detective Furman, the man who interrogated Tapp, was elected mayor of Idaho Falls and continued to insist that Tapp was the sole culprit. For this reason, clearing Tapp's name became more difficult than ever. When Tapp learned that Carol now believed in his innocence, he broke down in tears. Only then did he explain why he had confessed to a crime he didn't commit. It turned out that the police had shifted their focus from Hobbs to Tapp, targeting him because he was an unemployed dropout who fit their profile of a suspect. At first, Tapp thought he was being questioned about his connection to Hobbs, but soon they started blaming him for Angie's murder. Even though he repeatedly denied it, the police continued to coerce him into confessing. At that time, Tapp was just a 20-year-old, confused, scared, and unsure of what to do. Later, a police officer spoke to Tapp and told him he could face the death penalty. If he wanted a lighter sentence, he should admit to committing the crime alone, and so Tapp confessed. However, when he went to court, he tried to overturn the conviction for the crime he hadn't committed, but no one believed him at the time. When he learned that Carol had wanted him to death penalty, Tapp's heart broke completely, realizing he had signed his own death warrant. After hearing Tapp's story, Carol publicly declared that she believed Tapp was not involved in her daughter's murder. The woman who once wanted Tapp sentenced to death suddenly became the strongest believer in his innocence. Thanks to Carol's advocacy, by 2013, both the media and the public began to side with her. Although Carol believed that Tapp was not the killer, the effort to clear his name faced numerous challenges. In 2016, Tapp's lawyer filed a motion to overturn the conviction, arguing that Tapp's confession was coerced. The lawyer also pointed out several inconsistencies in Tapp's statements that did not match the case file. For example, Angie was confirmed to have been with friends around 12:30 a.m. on the night of the murder, and her bladder was full, indicating she had been asleep for a few hours. However, Tapp claimed that the crime took place around 1 a.m., only 30 minutes after Angie was last seen alive. Under pressure from Carol, the lawyer, and the prospect of a prolonged legal battle, the prosecutor proposed dropping the assault charge but maintaining the murder charge. As a result, Tapp would receive a sentence equivalent to the time already served, with the chance to be exonerated if the real killer was found later. Despite many advising against it, Tapp, desperate for freedom after 20 years in prison, foolishly accepted the deal in 2017. That same year, the woman who had testified that she overheard Tapp and Hobbs discussing the murder retracted her initial statement. She admitted that the police had threatened to charge her with drug use, forcing her to testify against Tapp. When she struggled to remember details during testimony practice, the police reassured her that it was because of drug use. Thus, Tapp was released in 2017, but still carried the label of Angie's murderer. Carol stood by Tapp during the hearing and was one of the first people he hugged after being freed. At that moment, all hatred in Carol's eyes had completely vanished. She believed in Tapp's innocence. After Tapp's release, the new police chief of Idaho Falls, Bryce Johnson, decided to reinvestigate the case. Carol also did not stop, knowing her work was not done since Tapp still bore the identity of a murderer. After learning about new genealogy DNA technology, Carol convinced the city police department to collaborate with a genealogy expert to test the unknown DNA sample. Upon hearing that the expert refused due to the degraded quality of the DNA sample, Carol personally reached out to plead for their assistance. After reconstructing a complete DNA profile from the crime scene sample, the expert identified a distant relative of the DNA owner in the genealogical database and created a family tree. Through the process of elimination, the expert eventually identified a suspect, Brian Lee Drips. What they didn't expect was that Drips had lived across the street from Angie at the time of her murder. After Drips was identified as a suspect, Idaho Falls police secretly monitored him and collected a discarded cigarette filter in May 2019. When DNA from the cigarette matched the crime scene sample, Drips was arrested in May 2019. During interrogation, Drips confessed to the crime, stating that he acted alone and did not know Tapp. He admitted to attacking Angie while drunk and under the influence of drugs. When Angie resisted and fought back, he decided to kill her. At a press conference announcing Drips' arrest after a long journey, Carol tearfully said, "I can't even describe how difficult this journey was and how hundreds of people were affected by the police's wrong decision." The grieving mother said Drips pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. With this new evidence, Tapp's lawyer once again requested a complete exoneration, which was granted in July 2019. Tapp was finally a free man with a clean record. On the day of his exoneration, Tapp embraced Carol and called her his second mother. Tapp affirmed that if it weren't for Carol, he would have carried that wrongful conviction to his grave. The image of Carol hugging Tapp, comforting and encouraging him, moved many people. After his release, Tapp went on to help change state laws to provide compensation for those wrongfully convicted. He also received over $1 million thanks to the new legislation. In addition, Tapp was awarded $11.7 million in a civil lawsuit against Idaho Falls and the city's department for the wrongful conviction. Tragically, Tapp was murdered in a hotel room in Las Vegas in 2023 at the age of 47. Case 3. On the evening of November 13th at 7 p.m., the Sanjo City Police Department in Niigata Prefecture received an urgent call from a worried couple. They reported that their daughter had not returned home after school, nor had she contacted them or sent any messages. This sudden disappearance terrified the girl's parents. Normally, their daughter would always come home on time after school, and she had never been absent for so long without informing them. When they called acquaintances in the area, no one had any information. With no other options, they turned to the police, hoping to find their daughter as soon as possible. The following morning, the police promptly took on the case and launched a large-scale search operation. They combed the area around the school, questioning friends, teachers, and neighbors for leads. Over 100 people, including classmates, teachers, and acquaintances, were interviewed by police to gather information. Meanwhile, more than 200 officers were mobilized to expand the search, scouring every corner of the city. Despite their relentless efforts, by November 15th, the police had yet to obtain any significant clues. Even with maximum resources deployed and weeks of investigation, the case saw no progress. Gradually, resources allocated to the investigation began to dwindle. The number of personnel in the Special Investigation Team was gradually reduced as leads repeatedly reached dead ends. Finally, on December 25th, more than a month after the girl's disappearance, the police department had to make a heartbreaking decision. The investigation was officially suspended due to the lack of any clues to search. The girl seemed to have vanished from the world, leaving her family in deep sorrow and a mystery no one could explain. One of the measures taken was to focus on individuals with prior convictions. The police compiled a list of individuals with criminal records related to similar offenses, particularly those previously arrested for harassment or assault. Additionally, they distributed flyers throughout streets, schools, train stations, and public areas to solicit support from the public. They hoped that anyone with information would contact the police to provide clues to help solve the case. However, a serious oversight occurred. Although the police filtered their list for individuals with assault records, Sato Yoshiyuki, the man later identified as the kidnapper, was not included as a suspect. Before the kidnapping case occurred, Sato Yoshiyuki had previously attempted to harass a woman but was unsuccessful. However, instead of being placed under close surveillance, he somehow evaded police scrutiny. This was a major flaw in the investigation, giving him the opportunity to commit an even more horrifying crime without detection. The suspect behind the girl's abduction is discovered. In June 1989, a year before the shocking kidnapping case, Sato Yoshiyuki had previously targeted a 9-year-old girl. Seeing the girl walking alone, he developed sinister intentions and approached her, claiming that he simply found children adorable and that she was walking unaccompanied. Fortunately, his behavior was noticed before he could do anything worse. After being arrested and put on trial, the court sentenced him to 1 year in prison with a 3-year suspended sentence. No one could have imagined that within the first year of his probation, Sato Yoshiyuki would commit an even more horrifying crime. Just a year after being granted leniency, he carried out a brutal kidnapping, imprisoning the victim for 9 excruciating years in a world of violence and pain. Sato Yoshiyuki did not live alone in the house where he committed his crimes. He was unemployed, spending his days confined within 4 walls, but what stood out was that he lived with his mother. This meant that the risk of his crime being discovered was extremely high, as a missing child could not be held captive for so long without someone noticing something unusual. However, Sato Yoshiyuki was cunning enough to keep his horrific actions concealed for many years. He was cunning enough to control the situation and keep his brutal actions hidden for many years. Throughout those dark days, the girl was confined in a cramped space where sunlight almost never reached. Every day, she lived in anxiety and fear, never knowing when she would be tortured or abused. Sato Yoshiyuki not only acted violently, but also constantly manipulated the girl's mind with chilling threats. Beyond psychological control, Sato Yoshiyuki repeatedly subjected the girl to ruthless physical violence. From the earliest months after her abduction, Sato Yoshiyuki constantly feared the victim would attempt to escape. To ensure she couldn't run away, he used an extremely cruel method. Whenever he slept or left the house, he would tightly bind her hands and feet, rendering her completely immobile. Under this oppression, the girl gradually became exhausted, losing her ability to resist. Her initial struggles gradually faded, replaced by hopeless surrender. After observing her for some time, and noticing that she had lost her will to resist, he gradually loosened his control. Her hands were no longer tied, but her legs remained bound for over a year afterward to prevent her escape. Throughout her prolonged captivity, aside from Sato Yoshiyuki, the girl saw no one else. The small room where she was confined became the only world she knew. She was even warned that if anyone discovered her presence, it would mean her death. Sato Yoshiyuki frequently beat her. Whenever he was angry or upset, she became his outlet for rage. Over those horrifying years, she endured more than 700 incidents of minor violence, but even worse, 200 to 300 severe assaults. The beatings stemmed from anything, a small mistake, or simply because Sato Yoshiyuki felt displeased. The years of captivity and relentless violence taught the girl how to survive in this painful world. She knew that Sato Yoshiyuki had a habit of striking her face, so whenever a beating came, she would try to shield her eyes to protect her vision. To her, losing her eyesight meant losing any chance of escape. So no matter how much pain she endured, she fought back to protect her most important asset, her sight. Despite enduring years of physical and mental abuse, one stroke of luck in her misfortune was that she was not assaulted by Sato Yoshiyuki. However, this did not lessen the cruelty he inflicted. During her captivity, every aspect of her life was under his total control. From eating and sleeping to her behavior, everything was dictated by Sato Yoshiyuki. In the early years, he ensured she had enough food to survive. However, this control was not out of compassion, but simply because he wanted to maintain absolute power over her. He didn't want her to die, but he also wouldn't allow her to live like a normal person. Everything began to change after 6 years of captivity. One day, Sato Yoshiyuki unexpectedly noticed a mole on the girl's foot. For an ordinary person, this detail would be insignificant. But for Sato Yoshiyuki, it became an excuse for a cruel change in how he treated her. Instead of ignoring it, he irrationally assumed that it was a sign of diabetes. He feared that if the girl was indeed sick, he would have to take her to the hospital for treatment, which could expose his crime. But instead of finding a reasonable solution, he made an extremely cruel decision. He believed that reducing her daily food intake could improve her health while minimizing the risk of having to take her outside. From that point on, her diet changed drastically. Previously, despite being held captive, she was still given 3 meals a day. Now, her food was reduced to just 1 meal. For an extended period, she received only a small amount of food each day, insufficient to maintain her health. Her body gradually weakened, and signs of malnutrition became increasingly evident. She frequently felt dizzy, exhausted, and too weak to move, yet she had no way to improve her condition. Seeing her body grow thinner and frailer, Sato Yoshiyuki seemed satisfied, yet he also worried she might die of starvation. He didn't want that to happen, because if she died, he would lose someone to control and abuse. With that in mind, he decided to show mercy by slightly increasing her food portions. But instead of restoring her normal diet, he merely added a small rice cake to her meager daily meal. This meager diet continued for 3 years, from when she was 15 until she was finally rescued. In fact, throughout her captivity, she was not allowed to bathe. Only when she accidentally fell off her bed and became covered in dirt did he permit her to bathe for the first time in years. Sato Yoshiyuki's behavior after 10 years is exposed from 1999 onwards. Sato Yoshiyuki became increasingly unstable, not only abusing the victim, but also taking out his anger on his elderly mother. He began using a stun gun to terrorize her, making her live in constant fear and unable to endure the oppressive environment. With no other choice, his mother turned to a psychiatric hospital for help. This decision inadvertently set in motion a crucial turn of events that led to the discovery of the missing girl. Following the hospital's guidance and advice, Sato Yoshiyuki's mother eventually decided to have her son forcibly admitted for psychiatric treatment. After years of enduring both physical and emotional abuse, she understood that without medical intervention, his condition would only worsen. At her official request, the hospital formed a special treatment team and went directly to Sato Yoshiyuki's house to forcibly admit him for treatment. However, when the medical staff arrived at the house, they were immediately met with intense resistance. In a furious rage, Sato Yoshiyuki vehemently refused to be hospitalized, shouting, resisting fiercely, and completely rejecting the presence of the medical team in his home. Realizing that the situation couldn't be controlled with words alone, the medical staff had no choice but to use force, injecting him with a sedative to subdue him. While all attention was focused on restraining Sato Yoshiyuki, one of the medical staff suddenly noticed something unusual in the house. Amid the chaos of the struggle, a thin, frail, and terrified figure quietly emerged from a dark corner of the room. It was a girl with hollow eyes, pale skin from lack of sunlight, tattered clothing, and a body so emaciated that she could barely stand. That girl was the one who had been missing for 9 years, the person whom the outside world had believed had vanished without a trace. After being rescued from the horrifying house, the girl was quickly taken to the police station to confirm her identity. Through fingerprint verification, the police confirmed that she was indeed the elementary school girl who had gone missing 9 years earlier. This revelation shocked everyone present at the scene. The girl had finally been freed from Sato Yoshiyuki's inhumane captivity. When the police informed the missing girl's parents, they rushed to the station immediately. Standing before them was someone whose body reeked, with hair so long it covered half of her body. It was difficult to determine whether the person was male or female, yet her parents recognized her by the protective amulet she wore around her neck. Despite her unkempt appearance, they embraced her tightly, and the 3 of them cried uncontrollably for a long time. Once calm, the victim recounted that she had been held captive by her neighbor for 10 years in a second-floor room of a house located just 600 meters from the police station and directly across from her home. When the story of the kidnapping and the 9-year-long search was revealed, Japan was swept by an unprecedented wave of outrage. No one could believe that such a shocking disappearance had ended not because of police efforts, but due to the chance intervention of medical staff. The public was furious at the fact that despite the large-scale search involving hundreds of officers, they had failed to identify the perpetrator living in their own neighborhood. Sato Yoshiyuki had even previously faced charges of child harassment, yet somehow he was not included in the suspect list. What angered people most, however, was the police's indifference and irresponsibility. On the day the girl was rescued, when news of the incident reached the police station, instead of immediately rushing to the scene to ensure proper handling, the officers in charge of the case were attending a party at a local hotel. Worse still, after the party ended, some of them even continued playing mahjong, completely ignoring this pivotal event. The police's negligence became a fiercely debated topic across the country. Under public pressure, authorities were forced to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the Niigata Police Department to clarify the severe errors made during the case's handling. Facing mounting criticism, the Niigata police eventually admitted to their grave mistakes throughout the 9-year investigation. One of the biggest oversights was that from the start, the suspect list did not include Sato Yoshiyuki. Additionally, police had visited his house 3 times over the 9 years, but still failed to discover the girl imprisoned in the dark room. After his arrest, Sato Yoshiyuki was taken to a hospital for a health check and underwent 2 weeks of treatment before being formally detained. A psychiatric evaluation revealed that Sato Yoshiyuki suffered from severe mental disorders, including schizoid personality disorder, SCPD, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCPD. While these disorders partially explained his abnormal and brutal behavior throughout the 9 years of captivity, legal experts asserted that this was not sufficient to absolve him of criminal responsibility for his horrifying acts. In his statements, he claimed to have experienced hallucinations and distorted thoughts throughout the time he held the victim. However, experts concluded that these hallucinations were primarily the result of the isolated environment he had created for himself and were not directly tied to the nature of his crimes. During his court trial, Sato Yoshiyuki shamelessly attempted to justify his actions with absurd excuses. He claimed that he never considered the victim a slave, but merely wanted a companion to talk to. These nonsensical justifications not only failed to reduce his sentence, but further fueled public outrage over his behavior in court. After reviewing the psychiatric evaluation and the horrific crimes committed by Sato Yoshiyuki over the 9 years of captivity and abuse, the court sentenced him to 14 years in prison. Although this sentence reflected punishment for his actions, it failed to satisfy the public. The case caused a national uproar in Japan, with many believing the punishment was far too lenient for what he had done. Public anger surged at the perceived leniency of the justice system, with demands for a harsher sentence to ensure justice for the victim. However, despite the intense backlash, the court's final verdict remained unchanged. After completing his sentence in 2016, Sato Yoshiyuki returned home, but was unable to reintegrate into society. A year after his release, he was found dead at home due to illness. His death marked the end of a tragic and enraging chapter in Japan's judicial history. Case 4. The case began on October 8th, when the Xiongling County Public Security Bureau received information about a missing person. What made the situation more tense was that the missing person was none other than the famous investigative police officer, Comrade Wang Qianjian. According to her family, on the evening of the incident, her mobile phone suddenly turned off and could not be reached. Notably, that evening she had planned to pick up her daughter after work, but then mysteriously disappeared. Initially, her family was not too worried about Wang Qianjian not coming home that night. Due to the nature of her work as a criminal investigator, they thought she might have been urgently dispatched to a case and hadn't had time to inform them. However, as time passed with no news and no one from her unit confirming that she was on duty, her family began to worry. Therefore, they had no choice but to report the incident to the authorities to initiate a formal investigation. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately launched a large-scale search throughout the city. All areas were checked, and the authorities coordinated closely to ensure no clues were missed that could help find her whereabouts. Based on collected information, before disappearing, Wang Qianjian had driven her newly purchased BMW to work. However, according to surveillance footage, disaster struck when she was parking in Lingxi Town, Zhejiang Province. While Wang Qianjian was preparing to get into her car, 3 men suddenly appeared and immediately restrained her. Upon receiving information about the kidnappers, the police quickly mobilized and tracked the suspects' movements using surveillance cameras along nearby routes. During the analysis, investigators discovered that the kidnappers' vehicle was heading towards Fujian Province. Despite setting up numerous checkpoints on major and minor routes, tracking the criminals became increasingly complex, as they constantly changed routes to evade police surveillance. As the criminals continuously changed their route and evaded law enforcement, realizing the risk that the criminals might escape control, the police immediately contacted the Fujian authorities to urgently request assistance in expanding the investigation. Thanks to the cooperation from the Fujian police, the investigation team identified the location of the BMW that Wang Qianjian had been driving before she went missing. When the car was found, hope among the police rose again, as they believed this might be an important clue to trace her whereabouts. However, despite locating the car, all efforts to find traces of Wang Qianjian yielded no results. This made the case even more mysterious, while the 3 suspects involved had quickly fled, increasing the pressure on the investigation. Believing that the suspects might not have gone far, the police decided to mobilize a large force to capture them. However, after some time without promising results, unexpected information came from a local hunter. The hunter contacted the police and reported that he had discovered a buried body in a remote forest. What was even more terrifying was that the body was wearing Wang Qianjian's name tag. This information sent chills through the entire investigation team due to its severity, but at the same time it was also the crucial lead they had been waiting for. The police immediately verified the location of the forest described by the hunter. After coordinating with other functional forces, the investigation team promptly initiated the excavation plan at the identified site. Police and forensic experts arrived at the scene, carefully preparing for the excavation process. When the body was uncovered, the sight before them left not only the investigators, but also everyone present at the scene shaken and horrified. She was buried in tattered clothes, her body severely injured, but the most terrifying aspect was that her head had suffered such a violent impact that it was unrecognizable. After many hours of continuous work, the forensic examination team officially confirmed that Wang Qianjian died from strangulation, causing suffocation. Marks left on victim's neck indicated that she had been subjected to extreme force, completely blocking her airway in a short period, leading to unconsciousness and death. Additionally, forensic doctors noted a severe head injury. Specifically, it was a major trauma causing intracranial bleeding, indicating that the victim might have been struck forcefully with a hard object. However, the detail that particularly caught the investigators' attention was the biological examination result. After conducting tests and analyzing samples collected from the victim's body, the forensic department found clear evidence indicating that the victim had been assaulted before death. Specifically, in the biological fluid samples taken from Wang Qianjian's body, experts identified the presence of DNA from 3 different male individuals. This result was immediately sent to the police's biological tracking department for comparison with the existing criminal database. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the police did not hesitate and promptly launched an extensive overnight investigation. In a short time, investigators identified 3 main suspects and pinpointed their location. Through careful checks and effective coordination between police units, the 3 suspects were located in Fuan City, Fujian Province, where they were attempting to hide. The 3 suspects were identified as Shi Jingzhan, Yi Chongfeng, and Wu Zhengxia, who were caught while driving Wang's stolen car. When the police approached and ordered them to stop, the 3 suspects appeared unprepared and had no counterplan. The police quickly apprehended them without facing any resistance. The lack of preparation from the 3 suspects indicated that they had underestimated the police's capability and did not anticipate the speed and decisiveness of the manhunt. During the interrogation, the suspects appeared irritated and said, "We knew she had a special identity, otherwise we wouldn't have killed her to silence her. Who would have thought despite our caution, you still caught us right on the spot." While gathering information from the 3 suspects, investigators discovered an interesting and important detail related to their health conditions. All 3 had serious health issues. One of the suspects had a deformed hand, rendering it unusable. Another had a hoarse and unclear voice, indicating a disease or congenital disorder. The last one, when agitated, would stutter, causing words to be repeated multiple times. These characteristics made the 3 suspects easily identifiable and increased their anxiety about being recognized. During the kidnapping, Wang had repeatedly tried to reassure them, promising not to disclose anything and to stay silent to protect them. However, the suspects still couldn't feel at ease. They believed that Wang would not be able to keep her promise and thought that once the incident happened, people around would certainly remember and recognize their faces. Therefore, they decided to kill Wang to minimize the risk and ensure that no one could identify them. According to the police investigation, the three criminals were unemployed and notorious in the area for living off theft and robbery. They likely noticed the high value of Wang Qianqian's new BMW and began planning to seize the car while she was still at work. It seemed they had been tracking her movements throughout the day, waiting for the right opportunity to execute their plan. However, the quick change in their plan demonstrated the criminal group's cunning. When they saw Wang preparing to leave work and get into her car, they seized the moment as she opened the door. At that moment, Wang was completely unsuspecting and off guard. She was in a good mood, looking forward to seeing her daughter after a long, tiring day at work. Wang Qian did not notice the three men following her from a distance, watching her every move. As she opened the car door, the three criminals quickly sprang into action. They drew knives to threaten her, forcing her into the car violently and unexpectedly. Caught in such a situation, Wang had no chance to resist and could only comply with their demands. Despite being a policewoman, she couldn't do anything against the strength of the three burly men. She was overpowered, held tightly and completely under their control. After searching her, the three men found a small amount of cash on her. They quickly realized that, although she was a young police officer, owning such an expensive BMW suggested she might have a large amount of money in her bank account. Seeing this as a chance to gain more assets, the criminals continued to force her to reveal her bank card PIN. At this point, Wang had no choice but to comply to avoid further suffering. After obtaining the information, the three criminals drove to a nearby ATM to withdraw money from her account. They managed to withdraw more than 10,000 yuan, about $1,300 from her bank card, thinking they had successfully seized the money without being detected. However, while making the ATM transaction, one of the criminals accidentally found Wang's police badge still in her wallet. Realizing that they were robbing a police officer, fear began to overwhelm the three men. Panicking, they quickly drove away from the scene, trying to escape as fast as possible. However, after driving some distance, they began to understand the danger of their actions. They realized that, as a police officer, Wang could cause them significant trouble. Thus, the three men quickly discussed and made the decision that they could not let Wang survive and return home. They drove to a nearby store, leaving one man behind to watch over Wang in the car. The other two got out and went to buy rope, a metal hammer and gloves to hide their traces. After preparing, they returned to the car to continue their brutal plan. The three men planned to take the car far from the city, searching for a secluded area with few passers-by to avoid detection. After driving around for some time, they finally found a remote forest in Fujian. Before carrying out the murder, the three men paused to take a closer look at Wang. She was a young woman, slender with a beautiful face marked by youthful and innocent features. To them, she was one of the few beautiful women they had ever encountered. Perhaps believing that she no longer had a chance to retaliate, the three men's minds grew darker. They worked together to restrain her, then began their heinous acts, satisfying their twisted desires without hesitation. After committing the horrific assault, the three men brutally beat Wang before mercilessly burying her alive in a deep pit. However, digging into the past of these three suspects, the police discovered that this was not their first time committing brutal crimes. Previously, they had used similar methods to attack other innocent victims. When confronted with Wang, they panicked, fearing that their past crimes would be exposed. According to the investigation, the three men had formed a criminal gang for a long time. They frequently moved along the southeastern coast, looking for easy targets. These criminals typically bullied the weak, targeting young wealthy women who were physically frail. They avoided confronting strong, healthy young men. For years, they moved between Zhejiang and Fujian provinces, mainly operating in rural areas where technology was less advanced. When captured, the suspects had a long criminal history in police records. During the day, they would drive around villages, observing and looking for easy targets. When they saw an opportunity, they would immediately stop the car, rob the victim, and quickly flee. Their living expenses were quite high, so small robberies were not enough to sustain their lifestyle. To make ends meet, they sometimes had to carry out multiple robberies in a single day. If lucky enough to steal a large sum, they would live comfortably for a while, but would eventually return to their old ways to find new victims. Once, they noticed a lone woman named Yuan. They quietly followed her to the entrance of her apartment. When she seemed distracted, the three men coordinated to drag her into their car and used violence to subdue her. They took her phone and some cash from her wallet. That night, Seeing that Yuan was attractive, the three men could not control themselves and dragged her to a deserted road. Despite Yuan's fierce resistance, they did not relent and continued to assault her. At the same time, they tightened her neck so much that she no longer had the strength to resist, leading to suffocation. After committing the crime, the three men did not feel fear, but rather a sense of relief. At that moment, they found a hard object nearby and struck Yuan's head forcefully, then carelessly dumped her body by the roadside. They hastily covered the victim's body with a few branches before driving away, without any remorse. Since the crime was not immediately discovered by the police, this made the three men feel more confident and increasingly reckless in their actions. Believing their method was too sophisticated to be detected, just 3 days later, they repeated the crime and found a new victim. Early in the morning, they lured Ms. Miao into their car. After robbing her of her belongings, they did not stop but continued to force her to engage in sexual acts with them. Not stopping there, on the same afternoon, the three men encountered another man named Yang, who appeared wealthy and carefree. They stole a gold piece of jewelry and several hundred yuan in cash from him. It is unclear what conflict arose between them and Yang, but the three men had no intention of letting him go. Instead, they tied him up with a rope and stuffed him into the trunk of the car. Fortunately, the road they chose was rough and bumpy, allowing Yang to free himself from the ties. He quickly opened the trunk and jumped out while the car was moving. Had the police not captured them, these three suspects would surely have continued committing more brutal crimes, destroying many happy families and harming more innocent victims. According to the suspects' testimonies and the information gathered by the police, between 2010 and 2011, within just 1 year, the three had carried out dozens of robberies. They forced 2 women to have sex with them and killed 1 innocent person. Many of their victims were young, talented individuals with bright futures. Wang Jianqian, the victim in this case, was one of them. According to the suspect's description, before dying, Wang pleaded for mercy, saying her children were waiting for her at home. However, these pleas did not make them hesitate, and they continued their cruel actions. At the time of her murder, Wang was only 37 years old. Despite her youthful appearance, she looked like a woman in her early 20s, thanks to taking good care of herself. Since childhood, Wang had been intelligent and capable. With outstanding academic performance, she easily got into a prestigious law university in the country. Many of her former teachers praised her intelligence and eagerness to learn. After graduating with impressive academic achievements, Wang had the opportunity to join the county police force. She became one of the rare female officers on the team. In her work, Wang never used her gender as an excuse to request leniency or reduce demands from colleagues. On the contrary, her seriousness and meticulousness often surprised her male colleagues. They considered her a role model to learn from and emulate. Colleagues affectionately called her the most beautiful policewoman, and many admired her happy life. Her husband was also a knowledgeable, gentle, and caring man. The couple had been married for many years, yet their love remained as strong as when they first met. Together, they cared for and raised their only daughter. If it hadn't been for this terrible incident, Wang could have become one of the key leaders of the police department in a few years. Her daughter would not have had to endure the pain of losing her mother at such a young age. What made people even more outraged was that the 3 criminals showed no remorse. Instead of feeling guilty, they tried to use family sentiment during the trial, asking the judge for leniency. Among the 3, 2 had previously been imprisoned and rehabilitated, but unfortunately, they learned nothing from that process. On the contrary, they became more indifferent to their crimes. When the trial ended and the final sentence was announced, the list of charges against the 3 men stretched over dozens of pages. Each crime they committed was not only a stain, a dark mark that could not be erased from their lives, but also the source of countless tears and suffering for the many families affected by their wrongdoing. The cases these 3 committed were no longer simple petty thefts or minor legal violations as before. This time, they had escalated to committing heinous and violent acts that far exceeded the moral and legal limits society could imagine. Their crimes not only caused property damage, but also harmed the lives of many innocent people, causing irreparable pain and loss to the victims. With their audacity and brutality, the crimes they committed this time crossed every moral and legal boundary. Therefore, the punishment they faced was severe and uncompromising. The court sentenced them to death, a fitting punishment for the crimes they committed, and a warning to anyone who intends to follow the path of crime and destroy other people's lives. Case 5. If you have a chance to visit the bustling city of Chihuahua, Mexico, and ask the locals about the most notable spot, their answer might be the La Popular bridal shop. What draws attention isn't the beautiful wedding dresses, but a mannequin that looks remarkably lifelike. The original owner of the store gave this mannequin the beautiful name La Pascualita. To this day, the mannequin is still displayed in the store, attracting curious visitors who come to take a closer look. From the very first days La Pascualita appeared in the bridal shop, it immediately caught the eyes of local residents. This bride mannequin has eyes that resemble those of a real person, always staring intently at anyone passing by the bridal shop. Not only the eyes, but also the mannequin's skin has a lifelike texture, soft and realistic to the point where veins can be seen beneath the surface. Particularly, La Pascualita's hands are so detailed that staff can see fingernails and veins. After observing the mannequin for some time, local residents quickly noticed something strange. The bride mannequin's face looked exactly like the bridal shop owner, Pascuala Esparza. With smooth skin, large round eyes, and long eyelashes, many people wondered if Mrs. Esparza had ordered a custom mannequin with her face as a keepsake. When some curious people asked the shop owner about this, she only gave a vague response. "This is my new mannequin. I call her La Pascualita," the bridal shop owner said. The owner's indifference only fueled the legend of the lifelike mannequin. Mrs. Esparza opened the bridal shop on her own and learned how to run the business. This woman was a single mother to a daughter named Cara. Cara was a beautiful girl with a passion for designing wedding dresses. At the age of 22, she decided to marry a sailor. He was a handsome man, well-educated, with an unusual hobby of collecting spiders. Before the wedding day, he gave Cara a suitcase and told her not to open it. On the wedding day, after changing into her bridal gown, Cara saw the suitcase and, out of curiosity, opened it. Unfortunately, inside the suitcase was a black widow spider, an extremely venomous species. Bitten by the spider, Cara tragically passed away on her own wedding day. The sudden loss of her only daughter plunged Mrs. Esparza into unspeakable grief. However, some people believe that Cara did not die from a spider bite. The reason is that Mrs. Esparza opposed her daughter's relationship with her boyfriend. The shop owner believed that marrying a man who frequently went to sea would be disadvantageous. She wanted Cara to marry a businessman, so she could have a more prosperous life. However, her daughter opposed this decision and insisted on marrying the boyfriend she had loved for many years. Facing her mother's disapproval, Cara became depressed out of sadness. She chose to end her life on her wedding day to make her mother regret her decision. No one knows the truth about why the bridal shop owner's daughter died, but one detail is certain. She passed away on her wedding day. Strangely, Mrs. Esparza did not hold a funeral for her daughter. No one knows whether the shop owner buried or cremated her daughter's body after she passed away. Oddly, just a few months after her daughter's death, Mrs. Esparza displayed the mannequin La Pascualita in her bridal shop. Coincidentally, the name La Pascualita given by the shop owner means little daughter in Spanish. Locals believe that overwhelmed by grief, Mrs. Esparza decided to embalm Cara's body and turn her into a mannequin. While the rumor about the mannequin being the mummified body of the shop owner's daughter remains unconfirmed, strange events began to unfold. One employee reported that at night, when the store was closed and no one else was around except for the cleaner preparing to leave, something eerie occurred. The employee heard a strange rustling sound. When she went to check, the female staff member was horrified to find that the La Pascualita mannequin had changed position. Terrified, the employee assumed someone was playing a prank and called out the names of her coworkers, but no one responded. Immediately afterward, she hurriedly closed the store and returned to work the following morning. However, when she arrived at work the next day, the female employee discovered that La Pascualita had returned to her original position. Too frightened, the employee resigned and started working at another bridal shop. Strange incidents continued to happen to other employees at La Popular. Some claimed they had seen the La Pascualita mannequin suddenly move in an instant. They also noticed that the mannequin frequently changed its position, just like what the first staff member had witnessed before quitting. Some people even felt that La Pascualita was not an ordinary mannequin, because it always seemed to stare at them intensely. However, the store employees, especially those tasked with changing the mannequin's clothes, were far from comfortable with it. Sonia Burciaga, a store employee, believed the mannequin was a real person because touching La Pascualita's hand felt like holding a human hand. The young woman also shared other chilling stories. On one occasion, when Sonia and her colleague Maria were assigned to change La Pascualita's clothes, something strange happened. While Maria went to the restroom, leaving Sonia alone in the room, she sat with her back turned to the mannequin and felt as though someone was watching her. When Sonia turned around, she saw La Pascualita blinking. So, is this mannequin really the mummified body of the shop owner's daughter? Many scientists flocked to Chihuahua to uncover the truth behind this story. Both locals and experts were divided into two opposing views. One side believed the mannequin was indeed the embalmed body of the shop owner's daughter, while the other side dismissed it as nonsense. Yolanda Robles, a scientist from the United States, shared her experience after studying the La Pascualita mannequin. After examining the mannequin's fingernails and touching its hand, Yolanda felt a smoothness similar to human skin. I also closely examined the skin on the fingers, where the fingerprints looked just like those of a real person, she said. These observations further fueled suspicions that La Pascualita was not an ordinary mannequin, but possibly a mummy preserved in a remarkable way. Many others presented similar evidence, stating that La Pascualita's hands were far too lifelike to belong to a typical mannequin. One scientist recalled the story of Rosalia Lombardo, a young girl whose father had her body embalmed for preservation. The girl was preserved so well that her skin, hair, and eyes remained virtually unchanged even after hundreds of years. Scientists have now discovered this embalming formula, which is capable of preserving a human body for many years, potentially explaining La Pascualita's lifelike appearance. Another theory suggests that La Pascualita's hair might be a wig, and her eyes may have been replaced, but the one thing that couldn't be altered was her hands. La Pascualita's hands had a distinct dark purple hue, resembling that of a deceased person, with peeling and dry epidermal skin, while the fingernails appeared strikingly realistic. One expert claimed they had never seen a mannequin with hands that looked so authentic. However, researchers from the Museum of Hoaxes and funeral experts alike dismissed the theory that La Pascualita was the mummified body of the shop owner's daughter as completely unreasonable. Researchers from the Museum of Hoaxes issued a statement regarding La Pascualita. They concluded that it was impossible for a mummy to remain so perfectly preserved in the environmental conditions of a bridal shop. The group explained that a real human body would decompose quickly unless preserved with modern embalming methods, which are extremely costly and difficult to maintain. Thomas Prower, a renowned funeral expert, shared his perspective on preserving a body in a bridal store for nearly a century. He asserted that maintaining a mummy in such conditions would require constant care and special environmental conditions to prevent decomposition. With his extensive experience, he stated that while modern embalming techniques can maintain a body in a standing position, it is impossible for a mummy to stay in perfect condition indefinitely. Moreover, the store's front window, exposed to the harsh sunlight, would certainly not provide ideal conditions for preserving a mummy. Displaying a mummy in a store window, exposed to the desert heat and human interaction over many years, would significantly diminish its freshness. One undeniable fact is that after 95 years, a mummy could never remain in flawless condition. Meanwhile, La Pascualita has remained completely intact for nearly a century, which is highly illogical. Considering all these points, Prower confidently concluded that La Pascualita was definitely not the mummified body of the shop owner's daughter. As a funeral expert, I can assure you that this mannequin is absolutely not a mummy, he declared. Another expert noted that while some mummies around the world have remained preserved for years, thanks to meticulous care, such conditions are rare and highly controlled. However, maintaining such a well-preserved condition for a long period is extremely difficult and requires highly specialized skills. If La Pascualita were a mummy, 95 years would be far too long for it to remain in such good condition. Climate factors must also be considered when discussing the long-term preservation of a mummy. La Pascualita is displayed in Chihuahua, Mexico, an area within the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion, known for its semi-arid climate. Humidity is a crucial factor that affects mummy preservation, and this semi-arid environment could help preserve a mummy longer, similar to the famous Egyptian mummies. However, Prower argued that preserving a corpse in this environment is still challenging, even if it may be more favorable than humid climates. Ultimately, Prower highlighted an important detail about La Pascualita's facial features. For a mummy, the lips and eyelids would dry out significantly, shriveling and wrinkling like dried beef jerky. If La Pascualita were indeed a real mummy, her facial features would appear visibly dry and wrinkled. However, La Pascualita's face looks remarkably smooth and fresh, which is unlikely for a long-preserved mummy. Based on these observations, Prower concluded that the possibility of La Pascualita being a mummy is very low. According to him, La Pascualita is likely just an exceptionally detailed mannequin, not the embalmed body of the shop owner's daughter as rumored. Another local legend suggests that La Pascualita is merely a mannequin. One chilling story tells of a French magician. The tale claims that this magician visited the bridal shop late one night, intending to use his magic to bring La Pascualita to life for a few hours. During the night, the two danced, drank wine, and celebrated their brief time together. At dawn, La Pascualita returned to her position in the glass window, becoming a mannequin once again, waiting for the magician to return the following night. Prower believed that human curiosity, combined with a lack of factual information, created fertile ground for imagination and creativity to thrive. Unclear, mysterious stories are often more captivating and generate greater curiosity than straightforward explanations. This very factor has kept the ghost bride La Pascualita alive in the community. Another reason the legend of La Pascualita persists is that it serves as a fantastic marketing tool for the La Popular bridal shop. Despite changing owners multiple times, the store has kept the La Pascualita mannequin on display as a promotional strategy. Teresa Cordova, a former University of New Mexico student, shared that she once visited the bridal shop to request an interview for her thesis in 2012. However, when she returned a few days later as scheduled, she realized she had been stood up. A store employee explained that no interview had been arranged because the shop owner believed doing so would bring bad luck. Cordova realized that the story of La Pascualita was not just folklore, but also a clever marketing strategy that kept the shop in the spotlight. Determined to uncover the truth about La Pascualita, Cordova searched archives at the local church. However, after a long search, she could not find any records about the life or death of the shop owner's daughter. This further reinforced the suspicion that the story of La Pascualita was merely a baseless legend. The shop's refusal to give interviews about La Pascualita may simply be a smart marketing tactic, helping to maintain the allure and mystery surrounding the ghost bride. It seems that the current store owner is aware that whether La Pascualita is a real mummy or not, it still holds significant value in attracting customers. When asked about the truth behind the famous mannequin in the shop, the current owner simply winked and vaguely replied, "Is it true? I really can't say." Case 6. On July 9, 2024, the 999 emergency hotline received a distress call from a girl with a faint voice. Strangely, they received a similar call to the address the girl had mentioned, but this time it was from a young man. Police immediately dispatched officers to Ashling Close, Hertfordshire, England. Upon arrival, they discovered 3 female victims lying on the floor in a gruesome scene. Mrs. Carol Hunt, 61 years old, was pronounced dead at the scene with multiple stab wounds on her body. Hannah Hunt, 28 years old, was found near the entrance with signs of crossbow injuries to her chest and back. Noticing that Hannah was still breathing faintly, officers attempted to rush her to the hospital, but tragically, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after due to excessive blood loss. The third victim was Louise Hunt, 25 years old, who died from crossbow injuries. However, she was found with her pants pulled down, raising suspicions that she had been assaulted. Strangely, although all 3 victims were women, only Louise showed signs of assault, while her mother and sister did not. This detail led police to suspect that the perpetrator may have targeted Louise, but for some reason, ended up attacking her family members as well. Moreover, the weapons used by the killer were inconsistent. At the scene, police also found an unfamiliar fingerprint on one of the 3 vodka bottles on the cabinet. No belongings were missing, and there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the perpetrator was someone familiar to the victims, possibly had been led inside by one of the women. During the investigation, authorities discovered that the 3 victims were the wife and 2 daughters of John Hunt, a BBC horse racing commentator. At the time of the incident, John and his eldest daughter, Amy, were not home, sparing them from the tragic event. After examining Hannah's phone data, police uncovered several details that unraveled their suspicions. At 6:52 p.m., Hannah texted her boyfriend, asking him to call the police, but without explaining the situation clearly. The second call received by the 999 hotline from a young man was indeed made by Hannah's boyfriend. About 2 minutes after texting her boyfriend, Hannah herself called the emergency hotline, but by the time rescue teams arrived, they were unable to save the unfortunate girl. At the scene, police did not find the crossbow or knife used by the perpetrator. Checking surveillance footage from the street outside the house, detectives spotted a young man carrying an unidentified object, wrapped in a duvet cover near the crime scene, at 6:55 p.m. This timing matched perfectly with the timeline established from Hannah's phone records. Furthermore, a white duvet cover was indeed missing from the Hunt household, identical to the one seen in the surveillance footage. Based on the CCTV footage, John Hunt quickly identified the suspicious man. He was identified as Kyle Clifford, a former soldier, and also the ex-boyfriend of Louise, John's last daughter. If Kyle was the perpetrator, this explained why only Louise had been assaulted before being shot with the crossbow. Since the Hunt family's doorbell had a camera, any conversations between the household and visitors at the doorstep were recorded, making it easier for police to investigate the case. After reviewing the doorbell footage, authorities discovered that the only visitor to the Hunt home on the afternoon of July 9th was indeed Kyle. Once Kyle Clifford was identified as the prime suspect, police issued a public appeal for help in locating him. They also warned that he was armed and dangerous, advising anyone who spotted him to call 999 rather than approach him. A large-scale manhunt for the suspect behind the triple murder was immediately launched. However, the search proved difficult as Kyle had fled. Despite searching his home and relatives' residences, police were unable to locate Kyle. Believing he was still hiding in the city and possibly planning to harm John and his remaining daughter, authorities intensified their efforts to track him down. After a 22-hour manhunt, police found Kyle near Enfield Cemetery at 6 p.m. on July 10th. Upon seeing police and sniffer dogs approaching, Kyle, overwhelmed with fear, shot himself in the chest with the same crossbow used to kill Louise and Hannah. However, he was fortunate to survive, sustaining only severe injuries. Once officers reached Kyle, they immediately transported him to the Royal London Hospital. At the cemetery, police also recovered the weapons he had carried, including a crossbow, a knife, rope, and duct tape. Following Kyle's arrest, police found a note he had written. One sentence read, "I could be a better man, but I choose not to." While Kyle was in recovery, police maintained strict security at the hospital to prevent his escape. Due to the severity of his chest injury, they were unable to interrogate him immediately. Instead, they focused on investigating his background. Kyle Marcus Clifford was born in 1998 and had briefly served in the Queen's Dragoon Guards. He joined the Army in 2019 and left the military in 2022. Kyle Clifford, a former soldier, was described by his ex-Sergeant Amber Knowles as undisciplined and lacking seriousness during training. After leaving the Army, he briefly worked at a fire safety company before being dismissed. Former classmates said Kyle aspired to live a reckless lifestyle. His brother, Bradley, is serving a life sentence for a violent crime, which Kyle often referenced to intimidate others. After sustaining a serious injury, Kyle became paralyzed from the waist down. Despite strong evidence connecting him to a tragic incident involving the Hunt family, including fingerprints and surveillance footage, he refused to admit responsibility. Kyle had dated Louise Hunt in early 2023, but the relationship became controlling. Louise ended things in June 2024. Days later, Kyle purchased several suspicious items and visited her home on July 9th. He was seen entering the house after speaking with Louise's mother, Carol. Authorities believe that soon after, a violent act occurred inside the residence. Later, Louise returned home, where she was assaulted and restrained. Her sister, Hannah, arrived afterward and was also harmed. Despite severe injuries, Hannah managed to alert emergency services. Kyle was later arrested and charged with multiple serious offenses, including unlawful imprisonment and possession of weapons. He declined to attend court hearings and denied the charges. During the trial, it was revealed that he had viewed controversial online content, though the judge ruled this information inadmissible. Witnesses described Kyle's behavior in the relationship as aggressive and controlling. The case drew public concern and highlighted the dangers of abusive behavior in personal relationships. Investigators and forensic experts were urgently mobilized, involving more than 20 detectives and a team of experienced forensic personnel. These experts conducted a meticulous survey at the site where the human bone was discovered, while also verifying clues and collecting additional evidence from the vast vacant lot in the West Mesa area. This is a rather remote area with complex conditions, making the investigation even more challenging. Under the scorching sun and the hard, dry desert soil of New Mexico, they began a weeks-long excavation. The results obtained after many days of relentless work left even the investigation team stunned. In that arid land, the police discovered numerous human body parts scattered everywhere. Some skeletons remained relatively intact, while others were just disjointed bone fragments. They appeared to have decayed over a long period under harsh sunlight and the severe natural environment, making the task of piecing them together a daunting challenge. To expedite the investigation process, the police coordinated with local authorities to expand the excavation at the vacant lot. They speculated that the original positions of the body parts might have been altered by the movement of machinery like excavators and bulldozers, since the area had been leveled and cleared for a construction project. Within just 1 month, authorities discovered numerous human bone fragments buried in this area. To handle the large number of bones, state forensic experts had to work tirelessly under the extremely harsh conditions of the New Mexico desert. They carefully took each step in sorting and categorizing the bone samples, working to piece them back together. This task required an immense amount of patience, as each bone sample had to be handled precisely to reconstruct the original shape of each victim. In addition to reassembling the bone fragments, investigators also applied advanced bone restoration techniques. Finally, they discovered that there were a total of 11 victims, all women aged between 18 and 25. This made the investigation even more complex, as these characteristics were not considered a random coincidence. However, up to that point, they still could not determine any specific connections between the victims. Investigators could only conclude that these were not isolated or unrelated deaths, but appeared to be linked to a larger case. Evidence suggested that this was a collective burial site, where the victims were killed and buried without mercy. Moreover, the investigation also uncovered some traces and evidence related to sexual violence. The injuries on the skeletons all indicated that these deaths were not natural, but the result of deliberate crimes. When this information was made public, the entire city of Albuquerque was immediately shaken. Panic and insecurity spread rapidly within the community, especially among families with missing relatives in recent years. They flocked to the police station, bringing portraits, medical records, and personal belongings of their loved ones, clinging to the faint hope that the police would finally find answers after years of waiting. Using dental records submitted by the victims' families since 2005, forensic experts eventually identified the victim as Victoria and Chavez, a sex worker. This was the first body discovered in the mass burial case that shocked the entire city of Albuquerque. However, the level of decomposition of the remains made it impossible for investigators to determine the exact cause of death or the specific time when she was murdered. About 5 days later, forensic experts identified another victim in the mass burial area of West Mesa. This time, the remains belonged to a young woman who was pregnant at the time of death, with the fetus estimated to be around 4 months old. The victim was Gina Michelle Valdez, born in 1982, who also worked as a sex worker. Previously, Gina had disappeared suddenly, causing her family great concern. Since then, her relatives had not received any news from her and were unable to contact or determine where she had stayed. The prolonged silence made them sense something was wrong, but at the time, no one could have imagined that Gina had become the victim of a serious crime. When her identity was confirmed, police began to hypothesize that the deaths of Gina and Victoria and Chavez might have been carried out by the same killer. This shocking information prompted the Albuquerque police chief to address the public to reassure them. In a press conference held shortly afterward, he stated that forensic evidence showed that all the remains unearthed had been buried for many years. The chief emphasized that if they discovered any newly buried bodies in the area, that would be the real cause for concern for him and the investigative team. However, based on the existing data, he assured the public that Albuquerque did not appear to have an active serial killer on the loose. The police chief's reassurance did not have the desired calming effect. On the contrary, it made sex workers in the city feel more anxious than ever. In response, the Albuquerque police quickly accelerated their review process. They urgently compiled a list of women known to have engaged in prostitution locally and who were currently missing without any known whereabouts. After finalizing the list, the police worked with forensic experts to cross-reference the missing women's list with the skeletal remains unearthed from the West Mesa area. This task was far from simple, as extracting DNA from the long decomposed bones posed a major challenge. However, with the assistance of advanced DNA testing technology, experts were able to isolate DNA samples from the skeletons. The results of DNA analysis began to yield significant breakthroughs. DNA samples obtained from the skeletal remains matched stored DNA from missing women on the list, helping to identify the victims. One of the next identified victims was Cinnamon Elks, a 32-year-old woman with a lengthy criminal record. Cinnamon was not an unfamiliar name within the local justice system. Over the years, she had been arrested a total of 19 times for prostitution, a common offense in the area. Additionally, Cinnamon had been charged 12 times for possession of illegal substances, particularly D***K, further complicating her criminal profile. However, what made the case even more complex and attracted significant attention from investigators was the statement given by Cinnamon's mother. She claimed that her daughter had a fairly close relationship with the two previously identified victims, Victoria and Chavez and Gina Michelle Valdez. According to her, all three lived in the same impoverished neighborhood, where relationships among residents were extremely close-knit. Moreover, she revealed that all three victims had a history of D***K use and had been involved in prostitution. The connection between them made investigators even more convinced that these cases might be a series of acts carried out by a single killer with a clear target. Later, the fourth victim was identified as Julian Cindy Nieto, a single mother who had lived in Albuquerque. Without a stable job, she gradually turned to prostitution to make ends meet. The last time anyone saw Julian was around August 2004, when she appeared in a bustling area of the city. After that, she suddenly vanished without leaving any trace, leaving her family and friends in constant worry and doubt. Despite efforts to find her, Julian remained missing. Forensic analysis confirmed that one of the skeletons found was the remaining remains of Julian. During the investigation, detectives continuously made efforts to connect even the smallest details from the four identified victims. They hoped to find a clearer link between the victims, which could help identify the perpetrator. However, the reality was far more complicated, as there was no evidence proving that they were murdered by a specific individual. For a year after discovering the mass burial site in the arid land of the Mesa area, investigators devoted all their time to analyzing every bone fragment, hair strand, and fingernail unearthed from the ground. They hoped to find any trace, no matter how small, that could lead to the perpetrator or shed light on how the victims were killed. Based on the time of disappearance and the remaining traces at the scene, investigators concluded that the murders likely took place between 2003 and 2005. Coincidentally, all the bodies were found without clothes and without any personal items such as wallets, bags, or documents. The absence of these items only added to the mystery and ambiguity of the case. The detail that none of the victims had accompanying items led investigators to speculate that the killer might have deliberately kept these objects as trophies, a common characteristic in serial killings with distorted motives. Additionally, authorities did not rule out the possibility that the victims while alive may have had connections with the criminal underworld or engaged in other illegal activities. With these findings, the police became more convinced that the case might be the work of a serial killer who had committed multiple similar murders without being caught. They began calling the perpetrator the Bone Collector, a name that was both eerie and reflective of the brutal nature of the killer. However, despite having clues and hypotheses, the investigation still faced many challenges. To intensify the investigative efforts, in 2010 authorities announced a reward of up to $100,000. The purpose of the reward was to encourage the community to provide vital information that could lead to the arrest and conviction of the killer. In addition, the authorities promised to keep the informants' identities completely confidential to ensure their safety. During the investigation, a few men drew the attention of the police. These individuals quickly became key subjects for thorough investigation. The first person to come under scrutiny was Fred Reynolds, a pimp. Fred was known to have a close relationship with one of the victims of the West Mesa mass burial. Moreover, Fred was reported to possess photographs of this woman, making him a significant person of interest in the investigation. Investigators believe that, given his extensive connections within the prostitution scene, he might have crucial information about the murdered victims. However, any hope of obtaining more information from Fred Reynolds was shattered when he died of a stroke in January 2009. His sudden death left the investigation at a standstill, as the police no longer had the opportunity to question him or access potentially important data that could help solve the case. Meanwhile, experts could not find any additional information from documents Reynolds might have left behind, and the photos he was said to possess could not be verified. The next suspect that police focused on was Lorenzo Montoya, an employee at a nearby print shop located less than 3 miles from the burial site. Reports indicated that there were mysterious dirt roads connecting his mobile home to the area where the bodies were found. Moreover, he raised suspicions by threatening to kill his girlfriend, even stating that he would bury her in lime. These threats were not just empty words, they sparked doubts about his potential as a real killer. Montoya's colleagues also testified that he had spoken about killing women and burying their bodies at West Mesa. In December 2006, Montoya committed a brutal act that was beyond dispute. He strangled 19-year-old sex worker Sherika Hill right at his mobile home. After killing her, Montoya attempted to hide the body by stuffing it into his car trunk, but he was caught and shot dead on the spot by the victim's boyfriend. At the time of the incident, investigators believed that this might not have been Montoya's murder. They suspected that he might have committed other killings before, as his method was extremely brutal. When police searched Lorenzo Montoya's home, they found a video recorded on his camcorder. However, only part of the video was made public. According to police, the first part of the video showed Montoya engaging in sexual activity with an unidentified woman. In the next part, the audio suddenly changed with sounds resembling tape being ripped and a trash bag being opened. One theory was that, in this video, Montoya might have been preparing to dispose of a body, which further raised suspicions about his involvement in the case. However, the lack of physical evidence, such as Montoya's traces on the bodies or at the burial site, made it harder to link him to the murders. This left investigators frustrated as they continued to search for other clues to uncover the mystery behind the West Mesa murders. In 2014, a breakthrough in a decades-long case led Albuquerque police to consider Joseph Blee as a suspect in the murders. Blee, known as the mid-school rapist for his criminal activities in the 1980s, he was suspected of repeatedly breaking into the homes of female students living near McKinley Middle School in Albuquerque and raping them. Shortly afterward, police began to suspect Blee's involvement in the murder of a sex worker. Police collected his DNA from the body of a sex worker found dead on Central Avenue. During the search for more evidence, police discovered several pairs of underwear and jewelry belonging to Blee. Additionally, investigators received a significant statement from one of Blee's fellow inmates. In a conversation, Blee coldly admitted that he had hired the victims involved in the West Mesa serial killings. He described them derogatorily and contemptuously, calling them filthy. These statements heightened the police's suspicions about Blee's connection to the 11 bodies found at West Mesa. In the mid-school rape case, Blee was sentenced to 36 years in prison in June 2015. Despite the sentence, the case remained controversial in public opinion. The new findings made the case even more complex, and Blee became one of the key suspects in the investigation of the West Mesa murders. Police continued to monitor and gather more evidence to determine his involvement in these cases. Meanwhile, West Mesa police began to seriously question a potential link to a criminal organization. The disappearances and mysterious deaths of numerous victims did not appear to be random, but could be connected to a complex criminal network. In particular, police noticed that the organization's activities extended beyond drug and arms trafficking to include money laundering and human trafficking. This organization was believed to be operating under the leadership of influential figures within the criminal world. These individuals maintained close ties with underground forces in both economic and political sectors, aiming to secure protection and evade law enforcement. Moreover, the organization was not acting alone, but was closely connected to international crime groups. One of their connections, such as Los Zetas, one of the most dangerous gangs in Latin America. Despite the many uncertainties, local and federal law enforcement continued to intensify their efforts to track down those involved. They collaborated with other agencies, including the FBI and DEA, to launch extensive investigative campaigns. Cybercrime experts were also mobilized to monitor and analyze the organization's online activities, hoping to uncover vital clues to reveal the truth. As of now, the West Mesa mass murder case, the first large-scale serial killing in Albuquerque's history, remains an eerie and unsolved mystery. Although law enforcement has been investigating for years and numerous theories have been proposed, the perpetrator has yet to be found, making it one of the most terrifying stories the city has ever faced. The vague clues, unclear leads, and complex details of the case have left all efforts to uncover the truth at a standstill. As time goes on, the case not only stirs public opinion, but also raises serious concerns about security and safety within the Case 8. In the autumn of that year, during the Shanghai World Expo, the Huangpu River's banks were crowded with people. However, amidst the bustling atmosphere, a strange sight at dock number 1 suddenly caught attention. A warning tape was stretched along the riverbank, completely isolating the area from the crowd. Inside the cordoned-off zone, a group of police officers and forensic experts were gathered around a strange object wrapped in several layers of cloth. This object had been discovered by a group of workers responsible for cleaning the waterways. While performing their duties on the Huangpu River, they noticed an object floating on the water's surface. At first, the cleaning crew thought it was just a pile of floating trash. But when the object was brought aboard, a foul stench immediately filled the air, causing everyone to cover their noses. Upon closer inspection, they were horrified to see pale skin faintly visible through the gaps in the thick cloth. After a brief shock, the workers immediately called the police to report this disturbing discovery. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived, quickly sealed off the scene, and began investigating. When the mysterious bundle was opened, those present at the scene were horrified. It was the body of a woman. But what was even more terrifying was the condition of the body. The body was not intact. The head, arms, and legs were completely missing, only the mutilated torso left. What made the police and witnesses shudder the most was the victim's abdomen. It was not only intact, but unnaturally swollen round, as if there's something inside. No one could believe their eyes until forensic experts examined the body and figured out a horrifying truth. The victim was a pregnant woman, and she was close to her due date. The police realized that they were dealing with a horrific murder, not just a simple killing, but something much darker behind it. Because, while the world's attention was focused on Shanghai's event, someone had quietly carried out a brutal act against a pregnant woman. When the woman's body was brought to the police station, 6 forensic experts assigned by their superiors were ready at the autopsy table. Although the body was headless, they still conducted a thorough examination of every detail to determine the cause of death. After inspecting the trachea and lungs, they found no signs of mud or water inside the body. This indicated that the victim was not drowned before being dismembered. Instead, when examining the remaining neck, they discovered bruising in the soft tissue, indicating she had been strangled to death. What moved the forensic experts the most was when they performed the autopsy, they found a fetus inside the woman's womb, at the late stage of pregnancy. According to medical assessments, the fetus was 9 months old, only days away from being born. If this murder had not occurred, the baby would have been able to cry and start a new life. But everything was ruthlessly taken away, and both the mother and the child had no chance of survival. Since the woman's head was missing, the police could not determine her appearance when she was alive. This made it incredibly difficult to identify the victim. However, it was the fetus inside the victim's belly that brought a vital hope in solving the case. A theory immediately arose in the investigators' minds that while the mother and child had perished, the father might still be alive. If they could identify the father of the baby, they could not only uncover the victim's identity, but also trace her social connections, narrowing down the suspect pool and identifying the real murderer. With that reasoning, the investigation team immediately extracted DNA samples from the fetus for analysis. This genetic data was then entered into the National DNA Database and compared with the DNA profiles of all the men in the forensic system. Despite the passage of time, over a year of searching yielded no valuable clues. There was no indication to help identify the baby's father, meaning the victim's identity remained a mystery. However, just when everyone thought the case would remain unsolved forever, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. One morning, as the investigators continued their work in fatigue, an urgent notice from the Forensic Data Center was unexpectedly sent to them. In the investigation room, the phone rang, followed by the excited voice of a forensic expert announcing that a matching DNA result had been found. Previously, during a police raid on a casino in Suzhou, a young man named Yang, a gambling addict, had been arrested. As per protocol, Yang was brought to the station, where he underwent strict checks, including fingerprinting and a blood sample collection for the database. When Yang's DNA was entered into the system and cross-checked, the computer immediately signaled a match. The forensic experts quickly confirmed that Yang was the biological father of the fetus found inside the victim's body. In the interrogation room, an experienced police officer sat across from Yang and asked, "Do you know a woman about 3 feet 3 tall, around 25 years old, who was pregnant and almost ready to give birth?" But Yang continuously denied it, insisting that he had no acquaintance with such a woman. According to Yang's statement, he was a man with no stable job, always hanging around casinos to try his luck, but he lost more than he won. Yang also admitted that although he longed for love, no girl would ever be interested in him due to his decadent lifestyle. Yang's statement did not contradict the information gathered by the police during their previous investigation. After confirming his details with his family and friends, the police could affirm that Yang was a degenerate gambler, unstable career, and completely single. This made the case even more mysterious than ever. If Yang was just a man who spent his days gambling and had no romantic relationships, then why did the fetus in the victim's belly carry his blood? But what shocked him the most was when the police revealed the DNA test result. Upon learning that the baby, which had never been born, was his own child, Yang was completely stunned. If he had managed to stay calm before and tried to justify himself, now his whole body froze, his face pale, unable to believe his ears what he had just heard. The police could easily tell he was in shock. His reaction wasn't that of a prepared criminal, but rather someone suddenly thrust into a beyond imagination situation. Yang tried to defend himself hopelessly, but every word and reaction revealed deep contradictions and panic. The officers in the interrogation room remained calm, not at all surprised by Yang's intense reaction. They were used to seeing criminals trying everything to deny their guilt. It wasn't until Yang gradually lowered his voice that a veteran police officer slowly spoke up, asking him to provide information about the places he had visited and the women he had met in the past year. But instead of answering immediately, Yang hesitated and grew tense, his mouth moving as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. The police could easily tell he was hiding a secret he didn't want to reveal. However, under the pressure from the investigators, Yang finally admitted part of the truth. According to Yang, over a year ago, he had come to Shanghai and stayed at a small hotel for a short time. During this period, he had met a woman to satisfy his personal needs. However, when the police pressed him further about the woman's identity, Yang didn't provide any specific details. He claimed it was just a casual encounter, a brief relationship. Yang only remembered that the person who helped him contact the woman was another woman, commonly known as Hong Ji. The police immediately took note of this name, as it could be the key to tracing the victim's whereabouts. If they could find Hong Ji, they could track down the woman Yang had met and verify whether she was the unfortunate victim of the case. After a thorough investigation, the police eventually found crucial information about Hong Ji. Hong Ji was not just a well-known madam running a prostitution ring, but also involved in various illicit activities, from gambling to drugs and other underground dealings. Under the pressure of the police, Hong Ji confessed that in early May 2009, Yang had come to her not only to seek pleasure, but with another objective. He wanted to contact a mob boss who was involved in drug trafficking to obtain methamphetamine. However, this mob boss had been sentenced to death for illegal drug possession, and Hong Ji could not help Yang connect with him at the time. Therefore, Yang's trip to Shanghai was essentially in vain, and he returned to his hotel in a bad mood, disappointed. To help Yang relieve his frustration, Hong Ji introduced him to a new girl in the profession. After negotiating the price, Yang spent the night with her and left Shanghai the next morning to return to Suzhou. When asked about the identity of the girl she introduced to Yang, Hong Ji mentioned that her name was Xiao Min. However, much like her own name Hong Ji, people working in this field rarely use their real names. Hong Ji couldn't remember the exact identity of Xiao Min, since she had just started in the trade and wasn't very close to her at the time. With this information, the police decided to use the big data system to track down Xiao Min's real identity. They focused on cross-checking all the hotel registration records in the area where Yang had stayed, looking for women aged 20 to 30, whose names contain the character Min between May 2009. After narrowing down the list to about 30 names, they immediately verified the identities through photographs. When shown the list of potential Xiao Mins, Hong Ji quickly recognized a familiar face. As soon as she saw one of the photos, she immediately pointed and confirmed that this was the woman Yang had spent the night with. Subsequently, the real identity of Xiao Min was revealed to be Fan Lemin. Hong Ji also mentioned that the last time she saw her was in September 2009, when Fan Mamin's pregnancy was evident. Tracing the household registration files for Fan Mamin, a group of investigators immediately set off for her hometown in Hainan province. Upon arrival, the police quickly met with her parents. When asked about their daughter, they were deeply moved, as they hadn't heard from her in over 2 years. The police collected DNA samples from Fan Mamin's parents to conduct a comparison. The final results confirmed the heartbreaking truth that the headless body found on the Wrongful River was indeed their daughter, Fan Mamin. With the victim's identity confirmed, the police could now reconstruct her life and social relationships before she was killed. Through the investigation, they discovered that Fan Mamin had left her hometown early on. After finishing middle school, she moved to Shanghai to find work, hoping for a better life. However, life in the city was not easy, especially for a young girl without any support. In the complex and tempting environment, she gradually became involved in illegal activities and chose the path of selling her body to make money. Delving deeper into the investigation, the police extracted communication data from Fan Mamin in the period leading up to her murder. Through analysis, they found that among the calls and messages she made, one particular phone number had been in frequent contact with her. Realizing this could be a crucial clue, the police immediately traced the owner of the number. Verification showed that the number was registered to a man named Yumorong, an employee at a large insurance company. When the police went to question Yumorong at his workplace, he immediately displayed signs of panic. Under the increasing pressure from the police, coupled with the fear of facing the consequences, he eventually couldn't take it anymore. Finally, Yumorong confessed his crime to the police and recounted the entire story. According to Yumorong's confession, he met Fan Mamin when he was already a stable man with a family and a son. But inside his marriage, he was no longer happy. As he grew older, he longed for new relationships. From there, Yumorong began seeking out new women, secretly meeting them to satisfy his desires. When he met Fan Mamin, he was drawn to her youth, but what particularly fascinated him was her innocence and gentleness, something that set her apart from the other women he had been with. She was not just a woman for him to indulge in physical pleasures, but also brought a sense of novelty he had never experienced. Because of this, their relationship was not just a series of casual encounters. They started frequent communication, and in Yumorong's eyes, he thought he was in control of everything. However, something Yumorong hadn't expected happened. Fan Mamin got pregnant. The pregnancy turned what had been a relationship based purely on satisfying his desires into a major problem. Yumorong realized that if his wife found out about this, his life would be ruined. But when the pregnancy grew, Fan Mamin began demanding that Yumorong take responsibility. Trapped and desperate, his mindset began to change. From someone merely seeking pleasure, he began to fear that Fan Mamin would expose everything. In his desperation, he made the brutal decision to kill his lover to erase any traces of their relationship. On the night of January 11, 2010, in the apartment where Yumorong had met Fan Mamin, the two had a heated argument. In the heat of the moment, Yumorong lost control of himself. He lunged at Fan Mamin, pinned her to the bed, and strangled her with his hands until she stopped moving. When he realized she was dead, he let go, but fear and guilt immediately filled his mind. Looking at Fan Mamin's swollen belly, Yumorong suddenly realized that he had just killed his own child. However, the fear and pressure of his reputation prevented him from leaving her body behind, as it would surely expose everything. Yet, he couldn't simply discard her body without doing anything. In a moment of panic, Yumorong decided to dismember Fan Mamin's body. He took a knife and began mutilating her body mercilessly. To dispose of the body, Yumorong carefully scattered the different parts of Fan Mamin's body across various locations along the Wrongful River, making it harder for her to be identified. However, no matter how hard he tried to cover his tracks, the truth would eventually be revealed. By chance, a cleaning boat on the river found Fan Mamin's torso and brought it ashore. Her death would not be buried in darkness, and the murderer could not escape the punishment of the law. Despite her close relationship with Yumorong, Fan Mamin never abandoned her way of life. She believed that the baby in her womb would be the key to a better and prosperous life. However, neither she nor Yumorong realized that the child wasn't theirs, but belonged to Yang, the man who had met her just once. From the moment it was unborn, the child had a tragic fate, and in the end, both the mother and child lost their lives. When Yang discovered that the child he never knew was his own, and that both the mother and child had suffered a tragic death, he was filled with confusion and torment. Meanwhile, Wrong, who had decided to brutally dispose of fan women, now could not escape deep regret. Both of them, each for their own reasons, fell into a spiral of guilt and regret they could not escape from. Case 9. The story began in June 2020, when a man living in the state of Kentucky, USA, proactively contacted local authorities to report an unusual incident occurring in a dense forest area. According to the man's testimony, he noticed a strong foul odor lingering in the forest for several days. The stench emanated from an area near the Leon River, a place rarely visited. At the same time, another witness claimed to have seen someone trying to bury a strange object in that area. The shape of the object closely resembled a human body, leading him to suspect that it was a cleverly concealed murder. Immediately after receiving the information, on June 30th, a special investigative team from the U.S. military quickly arrived at the scene to coordinate with local police to conduct an investigation and clarify the case. Through a thorough search process, they discovered the body of a woman in a dismembered state, buried deep underground. The victim's body had been divided into several parts, then carefully concealed by sprinkling quicklime and pouring concrete on top to slow down decomposition. These methods of disposing of the body indicated that the perpetrator had a clear understanding of how to cover up the crime and might have carried out similar acts before. However, the panic intensified when, in the surrounding area, they discovered 2 more sets of skeletal remains, also buried in a similar manner. The distance between the 3 bodies was only a few steps apart, making the case far more serious than initially assumed. The simultaneous discovery of multiple bodies within a small area strongly suggested that this was not just a single murder, but potentially part of an organized pattern of behavior. After the excavation, the bodies were transported to a forensic center for DNA testing and identity verification. Shortly after, the military confirmed that one of the victims was Private Vanessa Gillen. She was a young 20-year-old female soldier who had mysteriously disappeared on April 22nd while on duty at Fort Hood Military Base, Texas. Previously, her sudden disappearance within the largest military base in the United States quickly raised concerns and alarms among her superiors. According to the information gathered, that day, Vanessa was assigned to the warehouse to perform a task as required by her unit. However, from that moment on, she completely disappeared mysteriously without leaving any clear trace. By that evening, during the roll call, Vanessa's absence immediately drew attention because she was known to strictly follow the rules and had never left her duty without permission. An internal investigation team was sent to the warehouse where Vanessa was last reported to be present. However, all they found at the scene were the warehouse keys and her military ID card left behind. There was no phone, wallet, or any other personal belongings at the scene. Leaving the ID card led some within the unit to speculate that Vanessa might have left on her own or even deserted. However, when the military contacted Vanessa's family to inform them of the situation, her parents were completely shocked and could not believe this theory. They stated that their daughter was strong, determined, and responsible and would never leave the barracks without informing or contacting her family. If something had truly happened, she would have found a way to notify her family. The prolonged lack of contact made the suspicion of voluntary departure gradually fade away, replaced by growing fears that Vanessa had fallen into a dangerous situation. At that point, her family decided to launch a campaign calling for community support, hoping to gather any information about her whereabouts or condition. They also organized prayer vigils, press conferences, and continuously urged the military and media to intervene and uncover the truth. But the unexpected and devastating news arrived at the end of June, when the military officially confirmed that the dismembered body found in the forested area of Kentucky was Vanessa Gillen. This news deeply shattered her family, crushing any remaining faint hopes. The fact that an active-duty female soldier was murdered near Fort Hood Military Base caused widespread panic and concern among the public. This base, known for its tight security system, made it hard to believe that such a serious crime could occur. The police conducted a meticulous and cautious investigation, starting with the autopsy of Vanessa. The examination aimed not only to determine the cause of death, but also to search for any clues that could shed light on the case's progression. When forensic experts examined the body, they discovered a crucial detail. There were traces of semen on Vanessa's body, raising suspicions that she may have been sexually assaulted before being murdered. This discovery shifted the investigation's direction, prompting investigators to focus on identifying any incidents of sexual abuse that might have occurred before Vanessa's death. Along with this finding, the investigative agency decided to conduct an inspection within the Fort Hood military area. However, investigating within a military environment was not easy. Military information security is extremely strict, and all investigations had to follow stringent control procedures. As a result, investigators faced numerous obstacles in gathering information. They struggled to access records, personal information of involved soldiers, and faced a lack of cooperation from some within the military. Just when everything seemed to be at a complete standstill, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. The victim's family revealed that 3 months before her disappearance, Vanessa had called home and informed them that she had been sexually harassed by 2 military officers. This shocking information immediately caused a stir among those following the case. In the military environment, especially at large bases like Fort Hood, harassment and assault are strictly prohibited and implicitly considered impossible. Vanessa's family admitted that although she had shared some negative experiences within the military, yet they had chosen not to disclose this to the public or the authorities earlier, partly because they wanted to protect their daughter's dignity and safety, not wanting her to be stigmatized in an environment filled with prejudice and pressure. They also feared that if the information was made public, Vanessa would face strong backlash from the military. However, once they learned of her death, they had no choice but to share this crucial information with the investigators. Realizing that this was an extremely important clue, the authorities decided to request a search warrant to conduct a more detailed investigation at the Fort Hood area. During the investigation and analysis, an internal source provided a crucial clue. According to the source, on the day Vanessa disappeared, she was instructed to go to the warehouse to check and verify the weapon's serial numbers as required by the military. However, the significant detail was that while performing this task, Vanessa had direct contact with an African-American soldier named Aaron Robinson. This information immediately caught the investigators' attention, as Aaron Robinson was the last person to interact with Vanessa before she mysteriously vanished. It was noted that after this encounter, he was also the only person not appearing in any of the security camera footage at the military area. This not only raised suspicion, but was also an unusual sign, as the security cameras at Fort Hood Base operate 24/7. They cover a wide range of important areas, including the military warehouse where Vanessa was on duty. Robinson's absence from these videos led investigators to question his involvement in the case. As the investigation continued, a female witness unexpectedly came forward and provided crucial information. This woman claimed that she knew the truth behind Vanessa's case and directly identified Aaron Robinson as being involved in this mysterious incident. The woman who stepped forward to make this shocking revelation was named Cecily Aguilar. Aguilar was not a soldier but a civilian, yet she had a close romantic relationship with Robinson. Therefore, her testimony became especially important in the investigation process. During an interview with investigators, Aguilar openly admitted a horrifying truth that Robinson was the one who directly killed Vanessa Guillen. According to Aguilar's statement, on that fateful day, Vanessa met with Robinson to discuss work as usual. However, a heated argument broke out between them. The reason was reportedly that Robinson discovered Vanessa had a close relationship with another officer in the unit, which made him feel insulted and lose control. Although the argument didn't last long, in a fit of anger and unable to restrain himself, Robinson suddenly assaulted Vanessa. Vanessa, in an effort to defend herself, tried to remain calm and stated that she would not stay silent. She declared that she would report the incident to her superiors to demand justice for what she had endured. Hearing this, a feeling of panic and rage overwhelmed Robinson. Everything he had built over the years, with his military career and honor, could be ruined in an instant if the incident was exposed. And in a moment of lost control, Robinson grabbed a large hammer nearby and struck Vanessa. The fatal blow to the head caused her to collapse to the ground and die instantly. Tragically, during the entire incident, no one was present to witness or intervene, leaving Vanessa unable to escape the perpetrator. After committing the brutal murder of Vanessa, Aaron Robinson did not stop but quickly contacted his girlfriend, asking for her help in covering up the crime. With Aguilar's agreement and active participation, the two carried out an inhumane act that would horrify anyone who heard about it. They began by dismembering Vanessa's body into small parts, carefully separating body parts to remove any identifiable features. Not stopping there, To erase any remaining traces on the body, they covered the dismembered remains with a thick layer of lime. Then they mixed concrete with the lime, covering the body with a hard layer, slowing down the decomposition process. This helped obscure biological evidence, reducing the chances of determining the victim's time of death. Moreover, Aguilar directly assisted Robinson in accessing his Google account to delete the entire search history. This included keywords related to disposing of a body, how to dismember a human body, and methods to evade criminal prosecution. When Aguilar provided detailed testimony to the investigative agency, they immediately launched a manhunt and arrest operation for Aaron Robinson. The authorities quickly identified Robinson's residence, where he might be hiding. Subsequently, a capture team was organized and planned to apprehend Robinson quickly, aiming to bring him in for interrogation and clarify all suspicions related to the case. However, the subsequent developments took everyone by surprise. While being temporarily detained awaiting interrogation, Robinson took advantage of a security lapse and attempted to escape. He rushed out of the holding area in a state of panic and desperation, despite being surrounded and pursued by military units. When he realized there was no way out, Robinson drew a gun and took his own life, ending everything on the spot while being surrounded by the police. His sudden death left the investigation at a standstill, as the perpetrator was no longer alive to stand trial and be held accountable before the law. Moreover, 2 other sets of remains discovered near the site where Vanessa Guillen's body was buried have yet to be identified. The proximity of these bodies raised suspicions that Robinson might have been involved in other murders, or, at the very least, had knowledge of them. However, whether he was truly the perpetrator behind all of them, or if there were other accomplices, remains an unanswered question to this day. Even the questions surrounding the identity of the second officer that Vanessa mentioned when talking about being harassed remain unclear. Previously, although Vanessa had mentioned being harassed by 2 officers, she never revealed their names. With Robinson's death and the inability to interrogate him, the truth behind this series of assaults now seems buried forever. Meanwhile, Aaron Robinson's suicide also left many unanswered questions. He did not attempt to defend himself verbally, nor did he offer any justification or explanation for his actions. Instead, when approached by the authorities, he chose to take his own life, seemingly closing the chapter entirely. Could this have been a sign of late remorse, or did he feel compelled to die to avoid exposing someone manipulating him from behind the scenes? After all, the entire development of the case, as known to the public, stems solely from Cecily Aguilar's unilateral testimony. Robinson, who is believed to be the mastermind and the direct cause of Vanessa's death, never left any statement. Although there is no concrete evidence to confirm it, the U.S. military's silence and evasive attitude when questioned by the press about Robinson's death have only fueled public suspicion. Many believe that behind this case may lie deeper forces within the military. At the very least, there were serious lapses in management and supervision, allowing the perpetrator to escape and commit suicide right before the eyes of security forces. However, without further evidence, everything remains mere speculation and personal conjecture. Whether or not the truth will ever be fully revealed, the case officially concluded with the sentencing of Cecily Aguilar, the only living person directly involved in Vanessa's death. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas officially announced charges against Aguilar. She was accused of assisting Aaron Robinson in committing wrongful acts by deliberately altering, destroying, tampering with, and concealing evidence, thereby obstructing the investigation. According to the indictment, she faces a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release after serving her term, and a fine of up to $1 million. This sentence is seen as a fitting punishment for someone who aided a brutal crime, and as a partial consolation for the irreparable loss suffered by Vanessa Guillen's family. Though the sentence cannot bring Vanessa back, it at least serves as a strong statement that society does not tolerate inhumane acts, and justice, even when delayed, must still be served. The Vanessa Guillen case, with all its tragedy and sorrow, has officially concluded from a legal perspective, but the shockwaves it left in society continue to resonate among the public. Vanessa's mother, Gloria Guillen, once tearfully shared that she prayed to God to bring true justice to her daughter. She asserted that many people were involved in the case, from those who directly assisted to those who indirectly covered up or turned a blind eye to the truth about her daughter's death. The public's outrage and empathy with Gloria Guillen turned into action. In numerous cities across the United States, thousands of people voluntarily took to the streets to protest. They held up signs demanding justice and voiced their opposition to sexual violence and discrimination within the military. The tragic case of Vanessa Guillen shocked the entire nation and quickly drew attention from the highest levels of government. In an official meeting held at the White House, Gloria Guillen personally expressed her pain and plea before then-President Donald Trump. She hoped that her daughter would not become a forgotten victim and urged the federal government to step in to uncover the truth and bring about real justice. President Trump promised that the FBI and the Department of Justice had taken up the case and were conducting a serious investigation, assuring that the truth would be brought to light. Additionally, then U.S. Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy took decisive action by ordering the formation of an independent investigative committee. This committee had a special mission to review and clarify the existing problems within Fort Hood, where Vanessa had served. The investigation focused on discrimination, harassment, sexual violence, and the effectiveness of the internal complaint handling system. The scale of this investigation was considered unprecedented. More than 31,600 soldiers stationed at Fort Hood were surveyed, interviewed, and comprehensively evaluated. After months of diligent work, the committee completed a 136-page report. It presented 9 key findings and included 70 specific recommendations aimed at comprehensively reforming the system for monitoring and addressing misconduct within the military. The investigative report exposed a profoundly troubling reality. Within Fort Hood alone, at least 93 cases of sexual assault were deemed credible, but only 59 of them were officially reported to superiors. This problem was not limited to Fort Hood, but reflected a systemic issue within the U.S. military. At other military locations, 135 cases of sexual assault were identified. However, only 72 cases were officially reported and processed according to protocol. This significant discrepancy highlighted a serious gap in the mechanisms meant to protect the legitimate rights and interests of military personnel. What stood out was that most victims, despite their pain and sense of injustice, chose to remain silent and did not dare to report their experiences. The primary reason was their complete loss of faith in the military's internal reporting and investigation systems, where accusations were often ignored or suppressed from the outset. In the past, it was exceedingly rare for any significant punishment to be given to perpetrators within the military, regardless of the severity of their actions. As a result, victims felt that seeking justice was a futile battle, and the fear of losing their careers kept them from speaking out. Vanessa Guillen's death was not just a personal tragedy, but a powerful wake-up call for both the military system and society.